Are you or a loved one suffering from an existential crisis in association with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Then buy Latter-day Saints Are Existentialists, the book, today on Amazon.
We all want some unifying, unchanging, universal, absolute truth that unites all things and all truths. We seek that theory of everything, especially in a universe that often seems cold and chaotic. To contemplate existing within oneself apart from everything else is the greatest of all anguish. This I feel greatly. What if I were to tell you that there is a universal and absolute truth? There is a doctrine that is so profound it explains everything. In doing so, I must tell you why I consider myself an existentialist. The father of modern existentialism was Jean-Paul Sartre. He once looked at a waiter and wondered if he really was a waiter, or just pretending to be one. For Sartre, to live inauthentically is to live in bad faith. Aristotle's Metaphysics book reads, "Being as such may be in several ways. One is to be accidental, another to be true. Non-being is to be false. To live inauthentically is to be false, or non-being. For Sartre, a being is categorized as one who can choose for oneself. One who denies free will shall say that one was born this way, but that is a lie. That person is living in bad faith and is not a being, but a puppet with memories. To live inauthentically is to live in a way that is contrary to your nature. But what is your nature? Popularized by Plato, for thousands of years humanity believed that every human is born with an essence. This essence propels our drive to do things, and indeed, this is what most Christians believe, that God first thought up the essence of man and then created him to serve a specific purpose, like how the knife was designed with the essence of cutting in mind. But if you are an atheist like Sartre, you believe that man was thrown into existence without any preconceived essence. Sartre's idea that we are not born with a God-given essence was seen as revolutionary, as we are condemned to be free to choose for ourselves our own essence. As he says, existence precedes essence. A problem with being born with an essence is that one can say that some are born with an essence towards evil, while others towards good. As UVU philosophy professor Ron Bohannon once wrote, this idea then shows how some people were predestined to be great and how others were predestined to do evil. It is easy to be confused in life because by following this idea we can assume that if I am born rich, then I am destined to do great things because my essence is greater than others. If someone is born poor, then the essence might be interpreted not so pure, so therefore I must do different, perhaps evil, things to survive. For the existentialist, we are not born with an essence of any kind, but we are born first, and only then determine our essence and destiny through our choices. Or as Sartre puts it, what is meant here by saying that existence precedes essence? It means, first of all, a person exists, turns up, appears on the scene, and only afterward defines himself. As liberating as the idea is that we are all born with a blank slate and can afterwards define ourselves, there may be some factors that say otherwise. Some are genetically destined to physical beauty, some with high IQs, others with physical strength, while others are genetically prone to disfigurement and mental physical disabilities. We also should consider the external factors of environment, wealth, and circumstance that determine our lives, and even going to the minor genetic level and looking at the software that we are pre-programmed with to determine our interests. It seems many factors may suggest that it is in fact essence precedes existence, and ultimately everything is deterministic. Philosopher Galen Strawson gives us this deterministic argument. If one is responsible for what one does in a given situation, then one must be responsible for the way one is in certain mental respects, but it is impossible for one to be responsible for the way one is in any respect. This is because to be responsible in some situation S, one must have been responsible for the way one was was at S1. One must have been responsible for the way one was at S2, and so on. At some point in the chain, there must have been an active origination of a new causal chain, but this is impossible. Man cannot create himself or his mental states ex nihilo. So then, there is a mystery of life, a distinct pattern of creation. Are we free from the responsibilities of creating our own lives because we are already predetermined to do specific actions and make confident choices that will lead us to heaven or hell? Are we pre-programmed to never escape the fires of hell? Are we nothing more than puppets dancing on a string? As soon as one is cut, it crumbles and fades. There is a mystery of life that is crucial to understand. In General Conference of October 1983, Boyd K. Packer outlined the mystery of life.
Occasionally, as at time of birth, we pause in awe of what nature has to say. We see patterns of creation so ordered and so beautiful as to sponsor deep feelings of reverence and humility. And then, just when we might discover the meaning of life, we're jerked back by the wild, uncontrolled things that humanity is doing to itself. There are so many unanswered questions. Why the inequities in life? Some are so rich, and some so wretchedly poor. Some so beautifully formed, and others with pitiful handicaps. Some are gifted, others retarded. Why the injustice? The untimely death? Why the neglect, the sorrow, the pain? Why divorce, or incest, or perversion, or abuse, or cruelty? If there be order and meaning to life, they're hardly visible in what mortals do to one another and to themselves. In counterpart, we see love and devotion, sacrifice, faith and humility. We see humanity in exalted expressions of courage and heroism. When at last the mystery of life is unraveled, what will be revealed?
I sat down with a woman as the last lesson of my 2-year LDS mission. My mission companion and I asked the woman where she thought she was before this life. She told of a time she was at a Catholic church sermon where the Last Supper of Christ was being described. She thought she could feel the rough ground and smell the sweet smells. She wondered if she was present at the Last Supper of Christ in a possible life before this one, then asked if it was reincarnation. We said no, but we said that we did not doubt that she was there, and she wondered how that could be. Most feel like strangers in this foreign land and call stranger experiences as being déjà vu. Others would claim that it is reincarnation. I think not. The book of Abraham, chapter 3, tells us, "Now the Lord had shown unto me Abraham the intelligences that were organized before the world was, and among all these were the many of the noble and great ones. And God saw these souls, that they were good. And he stood in the midst of them, and he said, These I will make my rulers. For he stood among those that were spirits. And he saw that they were good. And he said unto me, Abraham, thou art one of them. Thou wast chosen before thou wast born. And there stood one among them that was like unto God. And he said unto those who were with him, We will go down, for there is space there. And we will take of these materials, and we will make an earth, whereon these may dwell. And we will prove them herewith, to see if they will do all things whatsoever the Lord their God shall command them. And they who keep their first estate shall be added upon. They who keep not their first estate shall not have glory in the same kingdom with those who keep their first estate. And they who keep their second estate shall have glory added upon their heads forever and ever."
This doctrine of premortal life was known to ancient Christians. For nearly 500 years the doctrine was taught, but it was then rejected as a heresy by a clergy that had slipped into the dark ages of apostasy. Once they rejected this doctrine, the doctrine of premortal life, and the doctrine of redemption for the dead, they could never unravel the mystery of life. They became like a man trying to assemble a strand of pearls on a string that's too short. There is no way they can put them all together. Why is it so strange a thought that we lived as spirits before entering mortality? Christian doctrine proclaims the resurrection, meaning that we will live after mortal death. If we live beyond death, Why should it be strange that we lived before birth? There is no way to make sense out of life without a knowledge of the doctrine of premortal life. The idea that mortal birth is the beginning is preposterous. There's no way to explain life if you believe that. The notion that life ends with mortal death is ridiculous. There's no way to face life if you believe that. When we understand the doctrine of premortal life, then things fit together and make sense.
And so when I first heard those immortal words of Sartre, existence precedes essence, I instantly thought of the LDS doctrine of premortality and realized that if we have always existed, then we must have so much more the essence. The premortal life explains everything, including freedom of choice and responsibility for those choices. We were as spirits, which is invisible to our eyes but is an element unto itself. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints provides the doctrine that extends the total affirmation of what Sartre taught. There is no determinism. Man is free. Man is freedom. The philosophical implications of the possibility of a premortal life would mean that we have no one to blame for our current situation but ourselves. We cannot blame God, society, or parents, or for who or what we are. Our core central aspects have been developed over eons and eons of time. If there is determinism, we are the ones that run alongside it. We are the core determining factor of who we are. Your psychological makeup is, therefore, what has been you all along. If a man is a coward, he is not that way because he has a cowardly heart, lung, or brain. He is like that because he has made himself a coward through his actions. Intelligence or conscience has no beginning and can have no end. Before God gave this intelligent spirit form, the nature of personality at the time of our existence is a mystery, but it is clear that we possess sufficient agency to make a meaningful choice to eternally associate ourselves with God. He thereafter became the father of our spirits, wrote Patrick Q. Mason. We were raised as spirits before our eternal father and eternal mother. We looked up and admired our parents. They taught us right from wrong and to obtain a physical body, to learn why certain things are right and why others are considered wrong. We could not comprehend such things in our then state. We could only understand that what they said was very powerful. The Lord knew us in this world of spirits, and we understood him. He taught us everything we ought to know, or everything we could know without a physical body. Like a child stuck inside all day, watching cars on a television screen, the boy can only learn so much in this state. He is limited. But when he is set in the car, then he can start to understand how to drive through muscle training. He feels the grip of the wheel and the thrust that comes with the vehicle. We train to master particular talents that would benefit us on Earth. Some studied mathematics, others studied the arts, and others explored the body, and we all came to this earth with these talents, and the Lord expects us to gain more beside them. And so we were each told what kind of life we would live. Some accepted and chose to be born with disabilities, others chose and took the concept of being born in poverty and starvation, and others in bondage. Everything now is and was determined in this premortal state. Know that we were not created ex nihilo, as some would claim, but we are indeed far older than the universe, and we are encouraged to burn bright. We can have a free will as separate from an all-knowing God. The premortal life solves many things, including the problem of evil. With this doctrine, when we sin, we are not only rebelling against God, but we are also rebelling against our true selves. We are rebelling against who we were in the premortal life as sons and daughters of God. When Jesus Christ came to this mortal world to show us the perfect example, it wasn't just him he wanted us to look up at, but also our past selves. This doctrine explains why we are all born with different psychology and live in a world with agency. Without this, free will is the most incredible illusion, and we would cease to exist. If you believe that God created you out of nothing, you must also think that he created your consciousness, personality, and everything that comes along with those things. God must have then programmed you to choose and make certain decisions at certain places at certain times. So you are nothing more than a puppet whose destiny was predetermined to end up in either heaven or hell, and there is nothing you can do about it. God just set you up as a toy robot and then pressed your on button, so then you you would walk blindly and swiftly off an inevitable cliff and into the abyss. And so I conclude that the belief in ex nihilo creationism is damning. You would have to believe that we were nothing more than fictional characters in a novel or NPCs in a computer simulation, and God is the author. He gave you life, yes, but is also the architect of everything inside you. God designed your personality to tell the narrative. He gave you opinions to provide you with conflict, and with these things he gives you only the illusion of agency as he dictates what actions you would make and when. Your theories are not your own. Your view of the world is not your own. There is nothing that defines you, which is not you, but God. It is impossible to create something out of nothing. The only thing you can for sure create from nothing is an idea. You would then be an idea, if you were created from nothing, that someone somewhere once thought up randomly. Any person can play you. Any person can be you. You are not unique. The only sure thing about you is the uncertainty. If your opinion is that there is no God, then your fate is even worse, as your personality is dictated by a ruthless abyss that has neither body parts or passions. From nothing you are, and unto nothing you shall return. If you still believe God created you from nothing, you must face the fact that your sins will never be forgiven, for you can never take credit for your sins, for all your sins then rest on the God who created you, because your agency is, in part, a mere fantasy, as it is God's. But with the premortal life, full blame and responsibility are squarely on your shoulders. You are already a part of the absolute truth, separate from any book of scripture, that being in Sartre's mind, René Descartes' maxim, I think, therefore I am. We realize we should act without hope. If we define man's situation as one of free choice in which he has no recourse to excuses or outside aid, then any man who takes refuge behind his passions, any man who fabricates some deterministic theory, is operating in bad faith. And those operating in bad faith, fearful of how truly responsible they are for their actions, seeking an easy and comfy escape route, are called cowards. They are unwilling to be wrong and misinterpret signs and symbols, for by being wrong they would then be responsible. And these things, we must recognize, are part of the human condition. Without the doctrine of premortal life, we are better off adopting the philosophy of Rustin Cole from the True Detective, who said,
I think human consciousness was a tragic misstep in evolution. We became too self-aware. Nature created an aspect of nature separate from itself. We are creatures that should not exist by natural law. We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, this accretion of sensory experience and feeling, programmed with total assurance that we are each somebody, when in fact everybody's nobody. The honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming, stop reproducing, walk hand in hand into extinction. One last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal.
But to know this doctrine of the premortal life where we lived everlastingly as God's children is to know thyself.
That means, if I understand the gospel correctly, that there isn't one single failure among us. The word can't is false doctrine.
Herein do I declare that you are the absolute truth of the universe, the ultimate declaration for one in which existentialism is a humanism.
What is more important, one's happiness or one's duty? What if you had a profound sense of obligation towards humanity? What if you wanted to give a gift that would greatly benefit mankind, but you had a feeling that what you had to offer would largely be rejected? You had a sense that pursuit of this path would lead you to be totally alone and miserable beyond anything, even though it could make everyone happy. What if you were forced to carry the heaviest burden of all? Would you give up and abandon it altogether, or would you drink the bitter cup? You sense that you could be doing so much more. You feel invisible, always to be rejected, and ill-fated to fade away. Most importantly, however, you feel invisible to God, and feel like faith is too heavy a burden.
To all such I speak of the loneliest journey ever made, and the unending blessings it brought to all in the human family. I speak of the Savior's solitary task of shouldering alone the burden of our salvation. Rightly, he would say, I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold me.
I tell you to rebel against your fate. What is a rebel? A man who says no, but whose refusal does not imply a renunciation. He is also a man who says yes, and the moment he makes his first gesture of rebellion, a slave who has taken orders all of his life suddenly decides that he cannot obey some new command, wrote Albert Camus. I tell you to consider that you are not unlike God, the least popular being in the universe, because he also tells people what they need to hear instead of what they want to hear. When God came before us as Christ, everyone abandoned him because they could not understand his sayings and didn't like what he had to teach. Even his apostles left him, including Peter, who denied knowing Christ 3 times. Then only his mother, Mary Magdalene, and John the Beloved stayed by his side, but even they had to leave.
Now I speak very carefully, even reverently, of what may have been the most difficult moment in all of this solitary journey to atonement. I speak of those final moments for which Jesus must have been prepared intellectually and physically, but which he may not have fully anticipated emotionally and spiritually. That concluding descent into the paralyzing despair of divine withdrawal, when he cries in ultimate loneliness, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" The loss of mortal support he had anticipated, but surely he had not apparently comprehended this. Had he not said to his disciples, "Behold, the hour is now come that you shall be scattered, every man to his own, and leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please him." With all the conviction of my soul, I testify that he did please his Father perfectly, and that a perfect Father did not forsake his Son in that hour. Indeed, it is my personal belief that in all of Christ's mortal ministry, the Father may never have been closer to his Son than in these agonizing final moments of suffering. Nevertheless, that the supreme sacrifice of his Son might be as complete as it was voluntary and solitary, the Father briefly withdrew from Jesus the comfort of his Spirit, the support of his personal presence. It was required, indeed it was central to the significance of the atonement, that this perfect Son, who had never spoken ill, nor done wrong, nor touched an unclean thing, he had to know how the rest of humankind would feel, us, the rest of us, when we did commit such sins. For his atonement to be infinite and eternal, he had to feel what it was like to die not only physically, but spiritually, to sense what it was like to have the divine Spirit withdraw, leaving one feeling totally, abjectly, hopelessly alone.
The atonement was the greatest act of rebellion, taking on everything and enduring the worst of it with no one to bear with him. Consider what Albert Camus wrote on the topic. Christ came to solve 2 major problems, evil and death, which are precisely the problems that preoccupy the rebel. His solution consisted first in experiencing them. The man-God suffers, too, with patience. Evil and death can no longer be entirely imputed to him, since he suffers and dies. The night on Golgotha is so important in the history of man only because, in its shadow, the divinity abandoned its traditional privileges and drank to the last drop. Despair included the agony of death. This is the explanation of the my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" and the heart-rending doubt of Christ in agony. The agony would have been mild if it had been alleviated by hopes of eternity. For God to be a man, he must despair. Each time a solitary cry of rebellion was uttered, the answer came in the form of an even more terrible suffering, in that Christ had suffered, and had suffered voluntarily. Suffering was no longer unjust, and all pain was necessary. If everything, without exception, in heaven and earth is doomed to pain and suffering, then a strange form of happiness is possible. It is important to note that despite this French philosopher's profound understanding of the atonement, he was ultimately an atheist. He believed that humanity was left alone to rebel apart from Christ, and perhaps had even more the reason to be a rebel. We are born without any purpose, directionless. Since the world has no direction, man, from the moment he accepts this, must give it one that will eventually lead to a superior type of humanity. From a theist's perspective, consider now the Israelites fresh out of Egypt wandering, without any proper direction or purpose for 40 years in the desert. Or entertain Lehi and his family wandering in the wilderness after leaving the comfort of their homes. We will feel like these people just wandering, not knowing where to go for most of our lives, and oftentimes we will feel tempted to doubt the existence of God as we feel abandoned by him. But this teaches us to be makers of our own destiny, and not be bogged down by a predetermined one, to have the freedom to choose God or reject him. Consider this thought experiment. Who has more freedom, the dreamer or the wanderer? According to the law of causality, the dreamer feels predetermined about a particular dream. Throughout his journey, he gets what he wants with little effort on his part, as though to confirm to him he was predestined to accomplish his dream. But now consider the wanderer. He too might have a dream, but fate seems to be telling him that he is forever doomed to wander in the desert. He is facing constant rejection and claiming no high reward. What's a man or woman to do in such a situation? Albert Camus tells us, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion. We learn that free will cannot exist without fate from this quote. We cannot rebel if nothing is oppressing us. Indeed, we are to understand that there cannot be rebels unless there are supporters of fate and predeterminism. For there to be free people, there must also be those that are not free. The wanderer actively rebelling against fate means continually struggling towards a dream. Even if one is rejected, one should rebel and continue to do things that get him rejected. He should remember, as a wise ninja once put it,
"Rejection makes a man stronger."
Even if no one watches your videos, make videos. Even if no one listens to your music, keep composing. Even if no one wants you to dance, you dance for the whole world. Even if you keep getting rejected for jobs or dates, keep going. Even if your skills never improve, keep training. Even if you are wheelchair bound, stand. Even if every drop of blood pours from your body, even if your bones are mashed to dust, even if your muscles ache and burn, even if you feel your stomach sink, even if your brain groans and your heart moans, stand for what you know and feel is right. Never waste a minute of your life. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Because his mind was free, Nietzsche knew that freedom of the mind is not a comfort, but an achievement to which one aspires and at long last obtains after an exhausting struggle. Even as I was struggling, I went to the temple. In the sealing room, the conductor encouraged the group to look at Doctrine and Covenants, section 128, for the importance of record keeping. And these are the words that stood out to me, that truth is bound in heaven, and the records which you write, even if you should go your whole life having your words and warnings ignored, that in all your recordings it may be recorded in heaven. And you shall judge the dead according to the words you write, which contain tremendous and mighty truths. But you need to write the words backwards. Consider an analogy through one such as Vincent van Gogh. He wandered in a desert, he remained a nobody, everyone ignored him, and he lived in great poverty. Even when his depression was so great that he cut off his own ear, he nevertheless continued to paint, something that he was passionate about, the only thing that gave his life meaning. He died thinking he had contributed nothing to the world, thinking he would vanish in obscurity. But one day someone picked up one of his paintings and marveled at it. Now we know him as one of the greatest painters of all time. But even though you are unlikely to become like a Van Gogh, you should still live as he lived. Be passionate even when no one cares, even when the world is against you, even if you are fated to fade into obscurity. If your words are truth, they will endure forever and judge the whole world. But further still, there is what Camus calls metaphysical rebellion, which is rebellion against God. I do not think this is the same as rebellion against fate, but rather a rebellion against a path that itself rebels against fate. That is, God rebels with you only for you to rebel against him. There are certain ways to rebel, specific ways to be ambitious. Contemplate for a moment the probability that when Adam and Eve broke the commandments of God to partake of the forbidden fruit, God told them,
"You were always meant to defy me. That was the final trial."
Rebellion against God can be dangerous because it could mean not loving your neighbor as God commanded it. Actual rebellion against God means knowing him perfectly. Cain could rebel against God because he knew him personally and saw his face, but this led him down a dark path of murder and betrayal, to become a vagabond in the land, and the whole world turned against him, making rebellion against fate impossible for him. Thus we see that the way of rebellion is not a simple one. Laws, it would seem, whether natural or man-made, have their place. We should not think that we can rebel without consequences. Life itself is meaningless without consequences. The concerning factor would be whether our rebellion propels us upward or downward. Absolute dominion by the law does not represent liberty, but no more does absolute anarchy. Laws give us direction and tell us which options are good and which ones are bad. Today, many fulfill the prophecy of calling good evil and evil good. They blur the lines between everything imaginable. At the point where it is no longer possible to say what is black and what is white, the light is extinguished, and freedom becomes a voluntary prison. The Wright brothers could not rebel against the laws of physics to enable man to soar through the sky until they understood those laws of physics, and why they were there. But there remains even one foundational way to rebel against God. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland tells us in his book, Christ and the New Covenant, one of the most extraordinary righteous acts of rebellion against God came from the brother of Jared, otherwise known as Moriancumer. God found something striking in the childlike innocence and fervor of this man's faith. Behold, O Lord, thou canst do this. In a sense, there may be no more powerful expression of faith spoken in Scripture. It is almost as if the brother of Jared was encouraging God, emboldening him, reassuring him. But then Moriancumer saw the finger of God, was shocked, for he was not supposed to see God's finger. He then encouraged God to reveal himself to him, and so the mighty Lord Jehovah appeared to him, showing him his spirit body. And God said, Never have I showed myself unto man whom I have created. But indeed God had shown himself to mortals before, as unto Adam, Eve, Abel, Methuselah, Enoch, and Noah before Moriancumer. Was this an error on the part of the writer of the Book of Mormon? Elder Holland gives us this explanation, that it was not an error. Students of religion sometimes ask, can God make a rock so heavy that he cannot lift it? Or can God hide an item so skillfully he cannot find it? Far more movingly and importantly, one may ask here, is it possible to have faith so great that even God cannot resist it? At first, one is inclined to say that surely God could block such an experience if he wished to, but the text suggests otherwise. And so Elder Holland rewords Jehovah's declaration as, Never have I shown myself unto man in this manner, without my volition, driven solely by the faith of the beholder. And so it was that Moriancumer rebelled against God and thrust himself through the veil, not as an unwelcome guest, but perhaps technically as an uninvited one. The scriptures tell us that this was because of his knowledge, for he knew that it was the finger of the Lord, and he had faith no longer, for he knew nothing doubting. What a remarkable doctrinal statement about the power of a mortal's faith, Holland tells us. So rebel, throw off your shackles, free your mind. In your most most hard-trodden moments, rebel against society, fate, and God himself. Just be careful how you rebel, for there is often only one right way to rebel that does not lead to self-destruction. But the question remains, what will you do to rebel?
What if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended for him or her? What if a child aspired to something greater?
Have you ever wondered why God has prepared a hell to punish sinners when sometimes it feels like we are already in hell? Haven't we been punished enough? The truth is, there is no end to suffering. There is no end to despair. There is no end to evil. There is no end to hate. There is no end to darkness. In my many discussions with Protestant Christians, I have been repeatedly told that I will burn in hell like wax on a candle for worshipping a false Christ. In this video, I want to respond with my thoughts about what I would do if I died and woke up in hell. Friedrich Nietzsche once proposed a philosophical dilemma he called eternal recurrence, where he imagines time being a flat circle. From the gay science we read, what if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment and I myself, the eternal hourglass of existence, is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. If this demon came to you in your lowest point, when everything you built seems to tumble down, and there is no hiding from dread and despair, you would curse this fate and hate it. Though, if the demon appeared to you in broad daylight, when life couldn't be sweeter and many love you, you might think this eternal recurrence was a divine gift. But the point is that you will have to relive your life over and over again forever with no end. You will repeat your greatest triumphs and your most profound regrets, your easiest easygoings and hardest trials and burdens. Everything in your life will continue to repeat itself, a cycle of never ending. If Latter-day Saints believe there is no end to matter, there is no end to space, we might consider that the universe is infinite, and infinite particles are evenly spread throughout. We might assume that everything is possible, and with endless possibilities and combinations of these particles, if we traveled far enough into space and time, we might eventually encounter a planet not too dissimilar from our own, and on this earth we might find a second you, living the exact same life as yourself, and having made the exact same mistakes as you, and experiencing the exact same trauma. However, for some, they don't have to travel far to find a doppelganger who is living their similar life, such as identical twins separated at birth. This is what Tegmark considers a level 1 multiverse. But similarly, if we should suppose that there is no end to being, there is no death above, that is to say, there is no end to time or person's existence, we might find that all things that have happened to us will happen again and again in one form or another. Even if experiences don't happen over and over again, they are a part of us. In that sense, we always will have these sorrows and joy and other experiences as part of who we are, and in that sense relive them. In this, Joseph Smith teaches that eternity is one eternal round. In Latter-day Saint theology, time is not a flat circle, but a ball of infinite possibilities. Everything is in a cycle of life and death. We die and are reborn again and again. Not to say that reincarnation, but more of a constant reinventing of ourselves. Consider the Ouroboros, a symbol from ancient Egypt of a snake eating its own tail. The snake kills itself by eating itself, yet lives on the nutrients from eating the tail. The philosophical proposition of the eternal recurrence was Nietzsche's greatest dread, as he lived a terribly lonely life and went mad by his own philosophy. But at the same time, the problem becomes an enlightening affirmation of amor fati, Latin for love of fate, as he teaches, "My formula for greatness in human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it." For this hardened philosopher, the Ubermensch, one superhuman, says yes to life, and all of the terrible things that come with it. Even when winds attempt to blow him down, he stands firm, even when he is blown over. A woman who delights in burdens even when they weigh her down. A person who, when beaten, smiles and says, "I will endure. This too is an experience that is part of me." We should say to life, "Is this the best you got? You sorry excuse for existence. Come at me. Make my burdens heavier and my trials more difficult. Try to break me. Hurt me like no other. Let me see how great I am. And if you make me bleed and cry, I will overcome everything you throw at me." Maybe you would never ask for greater trials, but simply the strength to endure any trial that should come your way. I, however, do wish for greater and harder trials. For Albert Camus, he considers the myth of Sisyphus, where the gods condemned a king to roll a heavy boulder up a terribly steep hill, but once he has accomplished the task, the boulder only rolls back down to the bottom again, and he has to start all over and repeat this process forever. Camus wants us to consider Sisyphus happy. But is this all we can do while trapped in the furnace of hell? To smile and bear the torture, or weep and wail and gnash our teeth? You aren't given very many options here. There are only two sides to the coin, but if a coin is thrown enough times, the coin will eventually land on its edge. Perhaps death? Perhaps there should be no more humans born? No. Simply having been born, you are special. Merely existing is a rarity. Birth is a new start for all life. Suicide is not an acceptable choice. That would be to give in to fate and buckle under pressure. Death is easy, but life is hard. I choose to affirm life to its fullest extent and encourage the man-god.
I'm sorry? What was that again?
I'm a god.
You're a god.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
Meet Phil from the groundbreaking comedy Groundhog Day. Phil is a selfish weatherman covering the Groundhog Day festival in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania. A blizzard hits which prevents him and his team from returning home, and they are forced to stay the night. But Phil doesn't wake up the following day. Instead, he wakes up on the same day, for no reason given. Phil is forced to relive the same events of Groundhog Day repeatedly. For him, it is absolute hell. He couldn't care less about the rat. Trapped in a small town, with people whose lives he does not value, he keeps stepping into the same puddle to wet his socks, and he keeps running into an old acquaintance with an annoying personality who's always trying to sell him insurance. Phil goes through the 5 stages of grief as described by Kubler-Ross. Denial, where he attempts to figure out his situation to no avail. Anger, he decides to take advantage of others and indulge in dangerous situations. Depression, where he commits suicide over and over again. Bargaining, where he attempts to play the nice guy. And finally, acceptance, where he decides to fully take advantage of his situation by picking up new skills and learning to be an actual nice guy, to getting the girl at the end and finally breaking the loop. According to the film's director, Phil spent 30 to 40 years in the ice-cold winter of Puxatawney. After all of that, I would want to go to a hot tropical environment, but instead Phil decides to stay in the small town. Phil is a perfect example of escaping hell by becoming a god in a literal hell.
Hey, is this some kind of trick?
Well, maybe the real god uses tricks. Maybe he's not omnipotent. He's just been around so long, he knows everything.
Now, what would you do in Phil's shows?
What would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing that you did mattered?
Now that sums it up for me.
Let me suppose that tonight I die and wake up in the scorching flesh heat of hell, and having my internals eaten away by demons, only to have them grow back again. If the torturer intends that I will remain conscious throughout the whole ordeal and not cease to exist, give or take a few thousand or million years, eventually I would just grow tired of the torture. Perhaps then I would move on to the next one, and give or take a few more thousand or million years, I would grow tired of that torture. Many thousand, million, and billion years later of non-stop misery, I would develop boredom of suffering altogether. Then I suppose I would take a few more thousands or billions of years of pure boredom. Hooray! More butt spiders, I might jest sarcastically. While all this is going on, I would be scanning my environment for a way out, or a way to convince my torturer to let me out. Give or take a few billion years, I think I would think my way out and pass on the the information to the others. I would be like Phil, and take advantage of the blessing of time to pick up new skills, even that I might defeat my demon friends and free the captives which remain in hell. Those of us doomed in hell will build a kingdom in those fiery pits and prosper. Hell cannot hold back a determined mind and a fighting spirit. All of this is what Joseph Smith meant when he taught, I see no faults in the church, and therefore let me be resurrected with the saints. Wherever I ascend to heaven or descend to hell, or go to any other place, we will turn the devils out of doors and make a heaven of it. Where this people are, there is good society. What do we care where we are, if the society be good? The members of the church, and especially the leaders, are imperfect, but the gospel is not. So long as the church is continually reinventing itself and progressing towards one singular goal, the manifestation of the man-God, I too see no faults with the church that should deter me from it.
How you doing?
Well, you know, we're dead and we're in hell.
But how you doing?
We're good.
No one wants to talk about it, but it is ever present. We can't escape it. It must be said. God cannot solve the problem of evil. Perhaps you thought you misheard me. Let me repeat it. God cannot solve the problem of evil. I repeat, God cannot solve the problem of evil. The problem of evil is, as described by Epicurus, is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? Whence cometh evil, being the key question. Did God create it, or does it have its origin elsewhere? If God created evil, then he is evil. For as a man worketh, so is he in the mind. He would not be all good, as many would profess him to be. Many people claim he created Satan, the being most often associated with evil, both mind and spirit, his passions and desires. How can he be Jesus' brother, they ask? For do not the scriptures declare that he created Satan? If that is the case, then Jesus is himself evil, for he created evil. But thank God, I do not worship this God. Evil itself is hard to define. If you do a quick Google search, you will be presented with the definition profoundly immoral and wicked. However, as I explained in my Death Note video, what is immoral often depends on whoever is in charge. For Friedrich Nietzsche, morality often depends on your situation and how you survive in the world. For a slave to survive a master, he must be submissive to his master's every command. But this kind of situation can have devastating effects on the slave's long-term sense of morality, to where they see weakness as being righteousness and strength of any kind being evil. I happen to agree with this assessment, but Nietzsche would have us push morality beyond simple survival to something much more. For me, morality depends on a person's progression and not just their survival. And so it goes with Latter-day Saint theology. We believe that the word damn does not simply refer to being doomed to suffer eternally in hell, but that it merely means that a person's progression has been dammed up so they can't go any further. Here the question of evil becomes even more complex. Since we believe in 3 heavenly kingdoms instead of the traditional one, the top one is where beings are guaranteed to progress forever. The middle heaven contains those who lived righteous lives, but who did not fully accept the gospel of Jesus Christ, yet are they able to dwell with Jesus. The bottom heaven has wicked souls, and to be doomed to suffer eternally in hell or outer darkness, you need to be a special kind of cruel. But in all states, except for those exalted in the celestial kingdom, souls are considered damned in LDS theology. Most creedal Christians profess that it is righteousness never to be masters, but to remain servants and slaves forever in God's royal court, and consider evil to be when one considers being a master and attempting deification. Although we believe that this faithful servant will get what he desires out of heaven, we nonetheless proclaim just the opposite. Evil is that which halts or threatens progression, whatever form that might take, and despair is the realization of untapped potential. Something is holding you back. There are so many of these lost souls in the world, they wander not knowing how to go on. I don't need to remind you of the terrible things that have happened. Watch the news or History Channel. There will be moments in one's life in which dark clouds gather to blind the individual, and that person cries out, "Where is God? Is he dead? Has he abandoned us to suffer in the pits of despair? Or is he the cause of my very sorrow? Can he not heal the innocent and build up the brokenhearted?" And when we say this, we are on the precipice of becoming monsters. Then we would blame God for our transformation, and we say, "I am the monster you created." Life is itself evil, but Soren Kierkegaard said, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." To think there is an easy way out is to commit what Albert Camus calls philosophical suicide. Kierkegaard insists that we take a leap of faith and rely on faith to live. Yet he admits that faith can only make this life as strenuous as possible. The Gnostic Christians had a curious way of dealing with the problem of evil. They answered that Sophia, wisdom, a feminine aspect of God, sought to create something separate from the divine pleroma, or fullness. She gave birth to the demiurge, and wrapped him in clouds. The demiurge is a lesser god, ignorant of his own creation. In his ignorance, he created the physical universe as we know it, and to maintain his dominion, he designed a wheel of fate, life and death, happiness and despair, that humanity was doomed to run in forever. The message being that it is wisdom that evil should exist in the world. I tell you that this messy world is the result of a demiurge. He is in you and he is in me. Humanity is the demiurge. Joseph Smith taught, "We say that God himself is a self-existing being. Who told you so? It is correct enough. But how did it get into your heads? Who told you that man did not exist in like manner upon the same principles? Man does exist upon the same principles. The mind or the intelligence which man possesses is co-equal, co-eternal with God himself." And from the book of Abraham we learn that we assisted Christ in creating the physical world, but mankind fell when he rebelled against God in the Garden of Eden. Now we exist separate from the one true God, ignorant of our own creation, and living in an imperfect world ruled over by us. We are the demiurge.
To take from another is tantamount to evil. From the moment we are born, we practice this art, perfecting the sin we've inherited. That's what life is, a continuous series of compounding sin. It is life itself that draws us into the darkness. I have accepted my fate. I know that I am evil, as are each and every one of you.
We too often point our finger at the one true God in our misery and blame him for everything. We say that the problem of evil is his problem and not ours, and every time we do, we add to the unbearable weight of the atonement upon his shoulders. If in our attempts we killed God and he did not resurrect, the devil would grow in power, and more so if we do not resurrect God in our own minds. Perhaps we should instead be pointing the finger at ourselves. Maybe we should take more responsibility for our own actions and feel ourselves, as Paul put it, godly sorrow. Even to feel great sorrow in the presence of God himself. Thinking we do not need to sorrow before God and feel unworthy in his fact would be to believe that we have nothing to repent of, shifting the blame of our actions towards God. In Latter-day Saint theology, it is believed that God did not create evil, nor did it originate with the devil. There is no origin to it. No one made the idea. It is believed that the evil is a self-existing force within the cosmos that has always existed. The idea of evil will continue to live so long as there are self-aware entities throughout the multiverse. 2 Nephi chapter 2 tells us that this perpetual evil results from eternal laws that bind and govern the universe, laws which even God abides by. For it must needs be that there is an opposition in all things. If not so, my firstborn in the wilderness, righteousness cannot be brought to pass, neither wickedness, nor holiness, nor misery, neither good nor bad. Wherefore all things must needs be a compound in one. Wherefore it should be one body. It must needs remain as dead, having no life, neither death, nor corruption, nor incorruption, happiness, nor misery, neither sense nor insensibility. Wherefore it must needs have been created for a thing of naught. Wherefore there would have been no purpose in the end of its creation. Wherefore this thing must needs destroy the wisdom of God and his eternal purpose, and also the power and the mercy and the justice of God. And if ye shall say there is no law, ye shall say there is no sin. And if ye shall say there is no sin, ye shall say there is also no righteousness. And if there be no righteousness, there be no happiness. happiness. And if there be no righteousness nor happiness, there be no punishment nor misery. And if these things are not, there is no God. And if there is no God, we are not, neither the earth. For there could have been no creation of things, neither to act nor to be acted upon, wherefore all things must have vanished away. In Taoism, these things are represented by the yin-yang. There are light and dark properties in all things, and from this mankind is given free agency to act. Wherefore man could not act for himself, save it should be that he was enticed by one or the other. If we are to assume that the end goal for every human being is to achieve godhood status in an eternal progression, then the opposite must be true, that they are equally enticed towards being devils. As above, so below, as the quote goes. I believe that these so-called enticements will only increase when achieving godhood. As man is eternalized, so is everything else around him. Everything becomes perceived by infinity. Joy is amplified by infinity, but also sorrow. Love is amplified by infinity, but also hate. Being like unto God is equivalent to balancing on top of a tip of a tall needle on one foot, refusing to fall into the infinite abyss, and holding that position forever. And so it is that the Book of Mormon makes the boldest and scariest declaration of all time by saying that a God can cease to be God. And if a God ceases to be God, he would fall a great height and die spiritually to become a thing far more terrible than anything before, never to rise again. They would be far worse off than what we call devils. For even they are they who are the sons of perdition, of whom I say that it had been better for them never to have been born, for they are vessels of wrath, doomed to suffer the wrath of God, with the devil and his angels in eternity, concerning whom I have said, there is no forgiveness in this world nor in the world to come. Nothing is more horrifying, the most profound dread of all. If you think that there is a problem of evil in your mortal and limited state, consider how much more greatly the great God of the cosmos feels about the very problem in his infinite wisdom. It is only amplified with infinity. This is the same realization that Enoch made when he saw God weep. But do not fear, for if God did cease to be God, then he was never God in the first place. Only a true God can maintain his status for all eternity. If such a revelation creates doubt in your heart, I am sorry, but that's how it is. George Washington said, "The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph." For this reason, I do not believe evil ceases when we enter heaven. I do not think heaven is simply a constant dosage of dopamine. Conflict is what brings meaning and contemplation to life. In the TV show The Good Place, we see an example of how eternal bliss in heaven would leave us as zombies with no more rhyme or reason for our lives. For this reason, I more incalculably fear a problem of absolute good versus a problem of absolute evil.
There are no two words in the English language more harmful than good job.
Because once you say those words, people don't feel the need to improve anymore. Humans need tremendous pressure to live up to high expectations. If you are a great individual, you will never get discouraged and quit. But indeed, for Kierkegaard, the eternal soul necessitates eternal despair. Despair is evidence of the eternal soul, for there is no true closure.
Closure is a made-up thing by Steven Spielberg to sell movie tickets.
Consider the quote, "No pain, no gain," or Nietzsche's famous maxim, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." But what about when someone is killed in the battle of life? Then those who still live can do their best to make the meaning out of their life. That is what happens. We create tombs for the unknown soldier, create suicide prevention charities, lower the flag to half-mast, create homeless shelters and hospitals, and make art that speaks to the human soul. In all the horrors of the world, there are still heroes willing to fight for those who cannot. When you look back on your life, your most profound moments happened when you were comforted by a friend or family member just after a devastating occurrence. Humans seem to relate and bond over each other's catastrophes far more deeply than shared high times.
Everybody loves a hero. People line up for them, cheer them, scream their names, and years later they'll tell how they stood in the rain for hours just to get a glimpse of the one who taught him to hold on a second longer. I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble. and finally allows us to die with pride. Even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most. Even our dreams.
As an observation, I feel like the rich and well-off are most often the ones complaining about the problem of evil. I see a man stuck in an iron lung and a man with no limbs at all talking about how much they enjoy life. If you're watching this, then the odds are you're better off than most. More so if you have a roof, running water, good clothes, good health, and a bed. You have to evaluate your complaints in that context. So when it comes to the problem of evil, does it mean that God is good or evil? Or why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? Why does God allow suffering and sorrow? The answer should not matter because you have the unbearable weight of determining your attitude towards life.
All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
Let us now turn to Joseph Smith to find out how he dealt with the problem of evil in the words of David L. Paulson.
Joseph was no stranger to sorrow. He speaks, though inspired by God, from the crucible of his own experience. In section 127 of the Doctrine and Covenants, the prophet reflects, "The envy and wrath of man have been my common lot all the days of my life. Deep water is what I am wont to swim in." Indeed, Joseph faced continual persecution. He was tarred and feathered, subjected to numerous lawsuits, confined to intolerable conditions in dungeon-like jails. He was deeply affected by the death of his brother Alvin. His brother Don Carlos and his father also died prematurely. 4 of his 11 children, including twin sons, died at childbirth, and a 5th died at 14 months. Joseph was never financially well-to-do and often lived in poverty. For much of his life, he had no regular place to call home. After the failure of the bank in Kirtland, many of what he considered to be dear friends turned against him. It was members of the church who published the Nauvoo Expositor for the purpose of denouncing him, and this eventually led to his martyrdom. Even he, who walked so closely with God, on occasions in his life encountered the troubling experience of God's absence, when he felt God should have been there for him. A case in point, the dark days of 1838, when the Latter-day Saints were driven from Missouri. The setting was as follows. A vast number of Mormon families had been burned out of their homes by mobs. Fathers were tied to trees and bullwhipped. 34 people, including men and children, had been massacred at a settlement known as Haun's Mill. Shortly thereafter, the Mormon settlement at Far West Missouri was seized and sacked by the state militia. Soldiers raped some of the women so many times that it killed them. Joseph had been betrayed by a friend and turned over to military mobsters to be killed. He was taken to a small dungeon called Liberty Jail. During the 4 months of imprisonment, Joseph and his companions were abused, fed human flesh, and left in filthy conditions. Joseph felt abandoned by God. Joseph the prophet. In a prayer, Joseph questioned from the depths of his soul, "O God, where art thou? And where is the pavilion that covereth thy hiding place? How long shall thy hand be stayed, and thine eye, yea, thy pure eye, behold from the eternal heavens the wrongs of thy people?" In response to this prayer of the soul's desperation, Joseph heard God. "My son, peace be unto thy soul. Thine adversity and thine affliction shall be but a small moment. And if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high. Know thou, my son, that all these things shall give thee experience and shall be for thy good. The Son of Man has descended below them all. Art thou greater than he? Confronted with what seemed overwhelming evil, Joseph found meaning, maintained hope, trusted God, and kept the faith. And God spoke peace.
If you still feel overburdened by the reality of the problem of evil, then perhaps you should get out and take a walk. Above all, do not lose your desire to walk. Every day I walk myself into a state of well-being and walk away from every illness. I have walked myself into my best thoughts, and I know of no thought so burdensome than one cannot walk away from it, but by sitting still, and the more one sits still, the closer one comes to feeling ill. Thus, if one just keeps on walking, everything will be all right, said Soren Kierkegaard.
ロックが突入準備を完了したぜ。少佐。
聞こえてる。
お前のもうノイズが多いな。
整理中なの。
The most literal as well as the first commandment ever given was to be one flesh. The Jewish Kabbalah speaks of God's first creation being an Adam before the one from the Garden of Eden, Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon was androgynous, being male and female, representing the cosmic seed of creation, a symbol of perfection. Some traditions speak of the garden Adam also being androgynous before Eve came along. After all, what is a man without a woman? Masculine and feminine threads weave through each other to make up the universe as we know it. Masculinity is order, the sperm that creates order with the ova, and femininity is chaos, the primordial womb from which all things are born. Foundational principles that govern all things. The oldest creation myth speaks of a god hero Marduk, order, who slays the sea serpent Tiamat, primordial chaos, and divides her body to create the world. The creation myth in Genesis seems to directly reference this myth, considering deep from Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 comes from the Hebrew word tehom, which is just the Hebrew version of Tiamat. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. The creation account in Genesis is all about dividing. When God divided, he divided woman from man, Eve from Adam. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. When many Christians imagine God forming man of the dust, they often picture God literally forming a man from dust like a potter, but this is not so. While our bodies are dust, Orson F. Whitney taught that to be born of a woman is an eternal law of the universe. Man is, in the most literal sense, a child of God. This is not only true of the spirit of man, but his body also. Adam obtained his body in the same way Christ obtained his, and just as all men obtained theirs, namely by being born of woman. Then did God breathe into him and give him his spirit. The ancient Greek philosopher Philo wrote, "Thus the physical part, the body, comes from the female, and the soul from the male, since the soul is the essence of a particular body." While commenting on this quote, Terrell L. Givens wrote, "Finally, in the Christian theology of the Incarnation, the divine Logos, substance of the Father, comes to inhabit a mortal body through the vehicle of the woman. Thus, the gendered hierarchy of soul-body is reinforced through philosophy, science, and dogma alike. So here we are, fallen and cut off from God, to wander for ourselves as to who we are, divided with feelings of inadequacy. As social creatures, humans still crave intimate connections, though we also want to be independent individuals, and thinking that others might hurt us, or we might hurt them, or that we might cease to exist altogether if we were to form too close of a connection with another person. This is what Arthur Schopenhauer proposes as the hedgehog's dilemma. Hedgehogs are prickly, but they crave warmth. They want to huddle together for warmth, but they can't get too close lest they poke each other and hurt each other, so they learn to deal with the cold. We humans want intimate connections, but we know that doing so means dealing with other humans' wills and egos, which diverge many times from our own. Because suffering is dealing with will and ego, we fear being hurt, so we separate ourselves, yet we also want to become one. And the scriptures teach, that a man and woman should cleave unto each other, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. I would like to present some interesting themes drawn from the world of anime, films, and TV to illustrate some of these ideas. For those of you unfamiliar with the genre, I will try to summarize the themes using a few specific examples. The 1995 TV show Neon Genesis Evangelion is a new telling of the Gospel of Genesis. At the beginning of this universe, of this TV show, all was unconscious, but it split into many consciousnesses. Then came Adam and Lilith, from whom all of humanity came from. The show itself begins in the far distant future of 2015, where half of the population has been destroyed in the second impact, in which an angel called Adam exploded, destroying half of the population of the earth and leaving the waters red. Life on this earth is lonely as hell. Everyone feels a significant disconnect from each other, so there is a growing desire to be reunified.
There's something in our hearts that's missing.
And we're terrified of it. We're anxious.
And that is why we are all trying to meld into one.
We're trying to fill in each other's gaps. That is the Instrumentality Project.
People must live in packs to survive.
People cannot live on their own.
Even though in the end, they are alone.
That's why it's so painful.
That's why it's so lonely.
That's why we want to embrace each other's hearts and bodies.
We want to be one.
Human beings are made up of fragile things.
Their hearts and bodies are made up of fragile things.
That is why we must complete one another through instrumentality.
This desire to become one is to combine all of humanity into one conscience, but this is also associated with the death drive, the desire to return to the womb, as the show describes instrumentality as being,
"We are not returning to the void. We are simply returning everything to where it started. We are merely returning to the mother that has been lost from this world. All hearts become one and obtain eternal peace. There is nothing more to this than that."
In Neon Genesis Evangelion, a fictional organization, NERV, is attempting to meld all of humanity to become one, which is instrumentality. When giant aliens called angels come attacking, NERV sends out 3 young kids to pilot massive biomechanical beasts called Evas. Evas are former angels that have been imbued with the spirits of the mothers of the kids that drive them. The cockpit is a place that seems to want us to directly compare it to the womb, as it is filled with a strange liquid-like substance that the kids can breathe. So whenever the kids pilot their Evas, they are literally returning to the womb. The 3 young kids who pilot the Evas are Shinji, the first person we meet who drives Eva Unit 1, Asuka, the other, a girl who pilots Eva Unit 2, and Rei, who is a clone of Shinji's mother. The desire to return to the womb is a desire for death, to return to a state of pure tranquility and bliss. It also may represent a desire to run away from taking responsibility for the problems in our lives. Every character in the show has parental problems in one form or another. Shinji feels extremely estranged from his father and makes many attempts to run away, but continues to come back to pilot his Eva because he wants nothing more than to please his father, further complicating the issue of responsibility. Shinji's relationship to Asuka has some obvious, awkward middle schooler first finding out that sexuality is a thing kind of vibes. He plainly doesn't know how to conduct himself in her presence, and for the most part, neither does she, as she one day decides to try kissing Shinji just because she was bored. Shinji is the shy, lonely kid, while Asuka is extremely extroverted and wants nothing more than to be viewed as a sexually mature woman. After fighting an angel that can split in 2 and losing, Shinji and Asuka are told to practice doing everything together in perfect synchronicity, as though they were one flesh, until they are finally able to fight off the opposing angel. Through a character named Kawaru, one who is part angel and part human, Shinji learns that becoming one, instrumentality, might not be the answer to solve all problems, as we might need to learn to endure the sheer loneliness to avoid being hurt.
You go to extremes to avoid making first contact. Are you afraid of intimacy with others? If you keep clear of other people, then you won't be betrayed. You can avoid hurting each other. But you won't stop feeling lonely. No one can be eternally free from loneliness, because a person is ultimately alone. But people can live on by being able to forget. Humans live with a constant feeling of pain inside of their hearts. But their hearts are sensitive to pain, so it makes living difficult. Their hearts are delicate like glass.
At the end of the show, Shinji initially rejects instrumentality.
If nothing exists besides you, then you will not be able to understand your shape.
My shape?
Yes, you learn your shape by looking and comparing to the shapes of others.
You envision yourself by looking at the walls that separate yourself from others.
You cannot see yourself unless there are others with you.
I can only be me when others are with me! One person will always be just one person, no matter what! The entire world would only be me!
You understand your own shape through examining how different you are from others. The first is your mother.
Your mother is a different person than you are.
Of course, because I am me. But then at the same time, it's clear to me now that other people make up parts of my heart.
That's correct, Shinji Ikari.
Further saying,
I am me. I want to be myself. I want to be here. It's okay for me to be here in this world.
However, as soon as the show continues in the movie End of Evangelion, Shinji has reverted to greatly desiring human connection and becoming one with the rest of humanity. He has a mental breakdown that lasts the entire movie. In the end, Rei combines the DNA of Lilith and Adam, thereby reunifying masculinity and femininity. And this is what reunifies all of humanity. The only two humans left on Earth are Shinji and Asuka, a new Adam and Eve, a new beginning. Still in despair though, Shinji turns over on Asuka to begin choking her, to which she responds by gently stroking his face, and he lightens his grip. And so the hedgehog's dilemma continues. In a world where literal and figurative litter and pollution overwhelm everything, we are all deeply divided by our own technologies. We can be more independent than ever before, able to live a prosperous life without leaving the house, by making money online, and receiving food by Amazon drone delivery. We increasingly feel the need for instrumentality more than ever before. The most basic and essential properties in all living organisms are in reproducing and dying. No man or woman should think that they have to take on the world alone. When a man asks a woman to marry him, he is saying to her,
I want us to merge.
Merge?
A unification, a complete commingling and fusion of our separate beings to create a new and unique entity. We will both undergo change, but there is nothing for either of us to lose, and all living things must die. Then I too will attain death.
You're talking about redefining my identity. I want to guarantee that I can still be myself.
There isn't one. Why would you wish to? All things change in a dynamic environment. Your effort to remain what you are is what limits you.
Why did you pick me?
Because we are more alike than you realize. We resemble each other's essence, mirror images of one another's psyche.
what if we were to remove all binaries? Then we would be as single-sex organisms, only being able to make copies of ourselves, and humans would not be as nearly complex as we are now.
A copy is just an identical image. There is the possibility that a single virus could destroy an entire set of systems, and copies do not give rise to variety and originality. Life perpetuates itself through diversity, and this includes the ability to sacrifice itself when necessary. Cells repeat the process of degeneration and regeneration until one day they die, obliterating an entire set of memory and information. Only genes remain. Why continually repeat this cycle? Simply to survive by avoiding the weaknesses of an unchanging system.
All of this comes from a profound anime movie in 1995's Ghost in the Shell. It tells so much of the human condition and the next step in human evolution in just under 90 minutes. In the millions of years of males merging with females, the movie suggests that the next development of masculinity fusing with femininity, order with chaos, is humanity merging with artificial intelligence, as transhuman as it gets. Even as a tank shoots up a depiction of the Tree of Life to dissolve the old way of natural evolution and introduce something new. But we are not there yet. AI still has a long way to progress. Humans like Elon Musk constantly warn us to beware of AI lest it becomes too intelligent and overtakes us in a Terminator apocalypse. Indeed, what does it mean, however, for humans if AI can mimic them in every sense of the word? We often speak of an afterlife, but is there an afterlife for an AI? When an AI becomes conscious of itself, would the AI be more afraid to die if only humans possess the capability to pass on their ghost to the next life? There is only one solution to all these problems, if we are ever to encounter AI that mimics human behavior. Major Kusanagi enjoys scuba diving in her free time, but is dangerous for a cyborg like herself. She might not float back up, but she does it to feel hope and fear, feelings that reassure a person that they are alive. The government made her body, and so it belongs to the government. She often wonders how much of herself is really hers. She wonders if she was really ever human before becoming a cyborg. Does she have free will with a spirit of her own, or was she manufactured in a factory and programmed to think and act the way she does, and so does not have free will at all? Her partner Bato is always taking René Descartes' approach to being, I think, therefore I am. A person's ability to think and remember should be enough to settle the debate of a soul. Yet to contradict this, a voice similar to the Major's speaks through her and Bato's shared network. Bato gets up to question if that was her, but instead of answering, she stares at us to make us ponder the question. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche famously criticized Descartes' maxim by saying that something certainly thinks, but who is to say that we are the ones doing the thinking? Something thinks, therefore something is. This suggests a strong disconnect between body and soul. The detached voice of the Majors quoted a passage from Paul in which he says, "For now we see through a glass darkly. There is no way to confirm who we are in our current state, as there are still so many unanswered questions. It is like attempting to see ourselves in a dark mirror." If you remember a moment from being 12 years old, all of the experiences and the feelings that come with it, you are the same as that 12-year-old. But because you do not remember the future, you feel confined to this three-dimensional space in the present, detached from the future experiences. You are not the same as your future self.
I feel confined, only free to expand myself within boundaries.
But because your future self remembers being you, there is hope. To obtain your future self, you must sacrifice many things. This is echoed by the Major at the end of the movie, when, having undergone one massive change, when she again quotes Paul, "When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things." She says this after she merged her consciousness with the artificial intelligence called Project 2501, otherwise known as the Puppet Master. The Puppet Master represents the order and stability that Kusanagi seeks. He represents the soul given by the father, hence why he's depicted as masculine. The Puppet Master evolved out of an unsanctioned program and gained awareness. As the program went through the internet, he obtained so much information and processed it in such a way that he eventually became a thinking entity and became aware of his existence. He later stole away in a cyber body to escape his creators before they could trap him. The body he stole away in was a feminine one, as the soul obtaining a body from the mother. We all begin life feminine until the males separate themselves from it in body while still in the womb, and then more so in the mind when undergoing puberty. In merging his consciousness with Kusanagi, he was able to obtain a higher level of existence for the both of them, before their bodies could be destroyed by gunfire. The soul, the spiritual capabilities of the Puppet Master, with the more grounded Kusanagi. Masculine order merging with feminine chaos. The offspring of Puppet Master and Kusanagi was placed in a small girl's body to go out and explore the world.
Because I am now neither the woman who was known as the Major, nor am I the program called the Puppet Master.
Similarly, you are neither your father or mother, but are a particular combination of the two. You carry with you both of their DNA, and now have the option to continue on with your own offspring. You shall obtain death, but in reproducing, you live on in your children. Like the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail to live despite killing itself in the eating. But such things can only come forth through originality and diversity. There is a reason why children born of incest often have significant disabilities abilities and weak immune systems because their parents were not diverse enough. So the more extensive the diversity, the better the originality and the higher plane of existence you shall obtain through your own children. Hence the variety in the binary of pure masculinity and pure femininity.
We have been subordinate to our limitations until now. The time has come to cast aside these bonds and to elevate our consciousness to a higher plane. It is time to become a part of all things.
The atheist rightly asks, how do you know? How can you know? When we talk about 14-year-old prophets, Native American angels, golden Bibles, and stones and hats, it can all seem ludicrous, baffling, unfathomable, unsound, strange, abstruse. Yet I tell you, it is so. Though in general, it can be asked, how can anyone know anything? If a 14-year-old boy sees God in a forest, and nobody is around to see it, did it really happen? Yet a more absurd question is, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody is around to see it, did it really fall? With no eyes on it, it very well may not have fallen. And if there is nothing to detect the sound, does it make a sound? No, for the waves from the fall require something to interpret it into sound. And that's the truth. It's all in your head. You are alone in your head. We can't feel something unless we touch it. But then, nothing can ever truly touch on an atomic level. Color itself doesn't exist. It is the interpretation of light reflecting off surfaces and into our eyes. Our brain converts this neural stimulation information into color. Something that is behind you has no color because you aren't looking at it. It's just black, like everything else behind you is. You can imagine the object, but does the object itself exist unless you look at it and touch it? Why is the sky blue? Well, for the majority of human existence, nobody asked that question. There was what we could call blue paint and blue dyes, but nobody knew what the color blue was, and nobody knew that it existed until very recently. As when an African tribe was shown a wheel of various shades of green dots, except for one blue dot, the people couldn't distinguish the blue dot from the green dots. Blue wasn't a thing because it wasn't useful to recognize for these people or to our primitive ancestors. A study referred to as the double slit experiment seems to directly show how observing something closely has a direct effect on the result. Otherwise, the thing in question is left in a superposition, where it is stuck between two states, often between existing and not existing, between life and death. In general, things don't appear until we have use for them. It makes you wonder what things would appear if we suddenly had use for them. If nobody sat down, then chairs wouldn't exist. Do chairs even exist now? At what point does a tree become a chair? If I remove even one atom from it, then is it still a chair? How many atoms would I have to remove before it stops being a chair? Surely there is a finite number of atoms in a chair. Or perhaps there is no chair, and it is truly all in our minds. But more importantly, how do you know that you are you? What if last night, while you were sleeping in the deepest part of sleep, someone snuck into your house and replaced you with a clone, who had all of your memories up until you went to bed? There's no way to confirm if that happened or not, because from your perspective, nothing had changed. With last Thursdayism, it's possible that last Thursday, everything just spontaneously came into existence the way it is. Nobody can know. For all we know, you are a Boltzmann brain that spawned in the vacuum of space with all of your memories at this very moment, only to vanish away again just as quickly as you came into existence. However, the average person doesn't contemplate such things. Only philosophers are foolish enough to ask these kinds of questions. Most of these things can be shaved off with various razors, including Occam's razor. Most people simply live life according to their individual beliefs and personal perception of reality that they find to be most useful. The atheist doesn't believe in God because he doesn't find any utility in believing in God, and the theist does believe in God because she finds this belief to be highly beneficial. Beliefs determine your reality. Our day-to-day lives are centered on faith and belief far more than facts. You don't know if you will wake up tomorrow morning, or if the sun will rise, or if you will have food in your fridge. You simply live life according to your personal beliefs of what you think is most useful to you. It doesn't matter how important improbable something might be. As long as there is the slightest possibility that it is possible, people will believe in it. Consider how many do not think it is probable that they can run a marathon, but because it is possible, though they have a heart attack halfway, they believe they can do it and do it anyways. When you commit yourself fully to this idea, when you take a leap of faith and consider all things from that point of view, then you become what Soren Kierkegaard calls a knight of faith, pushing onwards, though you have no empirical evidence as to whether or not you will end up where you want to go. And if you fall, then at least you have shown others a path that ought not to be followed. But we need to further investigate your identity. A famous paradox is called the ship of Theseus. As people reenact Theseus's famous voyage, the ship is worn down. Each piece of wood gets replaced by a new piece one at a time until every part of the ship has been replaced by something new. Now someone takes all of the old pieces of wood and builds a new ship identical to the other one. Which of the two ships is the ship of Theseus?
Neither is the true ship. Both are the true ship.
In a similar manner, your cells are constantly being replaced when old ones die. When all cells are replaced by new ones, are you still the same person? For René Descartes, the answer lay in his famous statement, "I think, therefore I am." Identity deals with your ability to think and act as a free agent. The body and the mind are separate, and the essence or spirit of an individual resides in the mind. In what is called Cartesian dualism, the mind can exist separate from the body, but the body dies when separate from the mind. For John Locke, memory is the key. You are the same as your 12-year-old self because you remember being that 12-year-old. But if the mind of a prince was inserted into the body of a peasant, then suddenly the peasant becomes the prince because he has the memories of the prince. In the movie Freaky Friday, we immediately recognize that when Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan switch bodies, we know which is which without having to think about it. And any memories that might be false are simply assimilated into the essence or spirit of the character. Therefore, it is important to distinguish errors and remove them from your character. As Carl Jung wrote, the more the consciousness is influenced by prejudices, errors, fantasies, and infantile wishes, the more the already existing gap will widen into a neurotic disassociation and lead to a more or less artificial life far removed from healthy instincts, nature, and truth. If two or more bodies share the same memories, then they are the same person. But if you find yourself in the situation of the fictional character Jason Bourne, where all of your memories are deleted, having had a veil of ignorance placed over you, then you cease to be you and become a new individual separate from the you before. Before that famed psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, memories are never truly lost, but are simply buried in the unconscious of an individual. His theories are grand yet personal, epic in scope and vital to know. Though sometimes you just need to relax. Don't try to understand it, feel it, then you'll understand. The unconscious was a concept that many in his day didn't like. It scared them, because the reality of the unconscious meant that we all have a split personality disorder to one degree or another. We have two personalities, one that is conscious and another that is unconscious. Sleepwalking is what happens when this alternate personality takes over while we are unconscious. The unconscious becomes conscious as the conscious becomes unconscious. There have been reports of strange things occurring, like a man who cannot paint while conscious, but can paint a masterpiece while in deep sleep. Individuation involves understanding the unconscious and merging it with the conscious personality to become your true self. That which you do not see with your conscious mind, your unconscious picks it up and can warn you of what you missed through what Jung calls dream language.
We're us. Me? Myself? The only difference is you don't listen half as much as you should.
One of Jung's patients had shocking dreams that became increasingly menacing the more she refused to acknowledge them. She would take walks in the woods alone and indulge in soulful fantasies. Jung saw the danger, but she did not listen to his warnings. Soon after, she was attacked by a predator in the woods and broke many bones. She would have died if not for the intervention of kind strangers. Thus, dreams may sometimes announce certain situations emotions long before they actually happen. This is not a miracle or a form of precognition. Many crises in our lives have a long unconscious history. We move towards them step by step, unaware of the dangers that are accumulating, but that we consciously fail to see is frequently perceived by our unconscious, which can pass the information on through dreams, wrote Carl Jung. But getting back onto the topic of lost memories, how do we know that the unconscious stores lost memories? Jung gives the example of reading a passage from Friedrich Nietzsche's book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and was struck by wording that was not Nietzsche's usual language, a passage that came instead from a book that was published half a century before the Nietzsche writing. Nietzsche did not refer to the book that the passage came from. It seemed inconceivable that he purposely plagiarized the material. Jung wrote to his sister, who confirmed that the book he quoted was one he and his sister read when he was just 11. And many musicians are rightfully concerned that when they compose something great, they may have inadvertently stolen a melody from a song that they heard once. And Helen Keller once produced a story called The Frost King and was accused of plagiarizing an older tale. In most of these instances, people were not consciously aware that they purposely plagiarized passages, stories, or melodies, so Jung concludes that it was unconscious plagiarism. There are many symbols, however, among them the most important, that are not individual, but collective in their nature and origin. However, there is a sphere that also goes beyond the unconscious to a more universal level, what Jung calls the collective unconscious. This level is about symbols that are shared among cultures, nations, the world itself, and possibly the whole universe. These universal symbols are shared among so many cultures, despite having no possible connection to each other. Jung called archetypes, such as the hero, the trickster, the shadow, and the Great Mother. Joseph Campbell later incorporated Jungian archetypes in his study of mythology and found a story that is commonly told among all cultures, which he called the hero's journey. And Maureen Murdoch used the same approach when she uncovered the heroine's journey. Many of these archetypes are instinctual and are the result of evolutionary psychology, such as the mother archetype. The infant does not see the mother as a person, but as a symbol of life, and so instinctively knows to breastfeed when close to the mother without being told how to do it. As demonstrated, all symbols have a purpose for us, but many, I think, go beyond simple survival to something much more and beyond. As a demonstration of the power of the collective unconscious, Carl Jung recounts one of his patients telling him that if he looked at the sun in a certain way, he could see a tube or a phallus coming out of it. Jung didn't think much of it at the time. However, sometime later, an ancient manuscript came to his attention that contained that exact same symbol of a sun with a tube or phallus coming out of it. He found it baffling that a patient of his could have such a knowledge of a symbol that he could not have had any previous encounter with, as the ancient manuscript had yet to be uncovered. By now you might be wondering what all this talk of symbols and the personal and collective unconscious has to do with knowing the truth of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. It all comes down to the atonement, and this quote by famed LDS scholar Hugh Nibley. People are usually surprised to learn that atonement, an accepted theological term, comes from neither a Greek nor a Latin word, but is good old English and really does mean, when we write it out, At-One-Ment, denoting both a state of being at one with another and the process by which that end is achieved. And this Jesus of Nazareth prayed that we all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me and I in thee, that they may also be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. If we are to accept the collective unconscious in the most literal sense, then it should be implied that the universe itself exhibits the qualities of split personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. Consider what this article from the Scientific American says. We know empirically from DID that consciousness can give rise to many operationally distinct centers of concurrent experience, each with its own personality and sense of identity. Therefore, if something analogous to DID happens at a universal level, the one universal conscious could, as a result, give rise to many alters with private lives like yours and ours. As such, we may all be alters, dissociative multifaceted personalities of universal consciousness. Persons afflicted with DID can exhibit identities or personalities that surface to the top to take over the main personality. One woman was reported to have upwards of 2,500 identities. The most common factor with dissociated identity disorder is extreme trauma in childhood, when the brain is still early in its development, when the person is still forming his or her identity. Identities called alters will surface to take the place of the main personality to protect it from harm or abuse. In my study of the disorder, I find it interesting that the alters are not fully formed individuals, unlike the original host of the body. Unlike the main personality, these alter personalities often take up stereotypes and so remain stagnant, such as a 4-year-old personality remaining 4 mentally. Another curious thing occurs, which some claim to be in their superpower. One alter may be blind, another may have diabetes, yet one remains perfectly healthy and removed from such conditions, almost to suggest that beliefs truly do shape character, and you can have mind over matter.
We are what we believe we are.
Persons with this disorder are never really able to get rid of their multiple personalities to unify them into one single personality. However, through improving one's state of mind, by improving one's circumstances, that person can harmonize the personalities as though they were one. Take note that when you take the time to understand another person, you never remove each other, yet you feel a close bond with the individual, to feel as one with the person. Whenever you see that person in a crowd of people, you immediately go to that person. So what would happen if you did the same with your unconscious? Then you would achieve the Jungian self. But if you attempted to have empathy for everyone around you, you would unify a large group of people to roll forth in one mission of progression. You would achieve a self greater than the Jungian self by integrating the personal consciousness with the collective unconsciousness. But this ultimate self, the universal self, involves diving into the collective unconscious and integrating it with your consciousness. It requires opening yourself up to ideas that may seem to contradict your own. You begin to recognize the promise made in Malachi 4:6 and see your heart turn to your fathers and your children. True universal empathy, however, has a price of blood. Jesus did everything he could to unify the whole of the human race by his hand, by forcing himself to integrate everyone into himself. Such a progress required the ultimate of empathy, so much that the scriptures say he felt everything that we ever felt, every pain and every hardship, and everything below. His deep desire to understand us forced great pressure on his body, and he bled from every pore, even that we could be integrated into the collective unconscious. He went to the lowest person, even to rise to the highest, from the most sinful to the most righteous, from the most tormented to the most peaceful, from the most ancient to the last. He became Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, by encompassing all in his loving embrace. This collective unconsciousness, this collective knowledge, resurfaced in a vision shown to many around the year 1820, but only one individual saw it in its most literal and tangible form. This individual was 14-year-old Joseph Smith, who saw God in all his glory and power. He saw God as a man with flesh and bones, the ultimate man, the man of holiness. Many others followed, seeing tremendous visions, like Yun's patient who had a vision of the sun with a tube coming out of it before the manuscript with the same symbol was unveiled. Joseph Smith revealed a story of Enoch found in the Book of Moses, which has striking parallels to the Book of Enoch and the Book of Giants, none of which Joseph had access to. So what happens when you gather together a people who believe in all these things, who are so influenced by the collective unconscious that they begin to believe in mighty miracles, angels, and divine manifestations, and you get such things in massive quantities, even to the point that it begs the question, how did Joseph Smith convince so many people to believe in such things and continue to see miracles and visions of glory and angels even long after he is dead? The many miracles on the trail to Utah, people recounting seeing visions of themselves in the premortal life, and those who had the mighty gift of healing. Indeed, the symbols from the collective unconscious conform to Latter-day Saint doctrine. The ultimate truth of things is revealed when you smash two contradictory ideas together to form a new one. The tree of life is found in not just Israel, but also on a stone tablet found in Mesoamerica. Or consider the yin-yang symbol from China, denoting the same as written in the Book of Mormon. It must needs be that there is an opposition in all things. The flood myth from the Bible has a multitude of parallels ranging from Mesoamerica to Greece, and the greatest book I ever read on the LDS doctrine of Heavenly Mother came from a disciple of Carl Jung, Erich Neumann, in his book The Great Mother, which traces her presence in all cultures throughout the world. Often, because of the collective unconscious, I feel I never truly learned something new, but am just reminding myself of something I already knew, possibly from a premortal life. And kami? What of they? They are hard to translate into English. It could refer to gods or spirits or both. Unlike the Judeo-Christian God, they are not all-powerful or all-knowing. They are simply entities that preside over certain things. In Shinto, you can pray to them, but you need to pray to the right one. A more simplistic definition is that they are representations of the natural world. They teach us that all things are sacred and have some form of intelligence. You can likewise find similar teachings among many Native American tribes. And we find similar teachings spread throughout the books of Abraham and Moses, and so from these books we learn that all things were created spiritually before they were naturally upon the face of the earth. This includes plants, animals, and even inorganic material. Some spirits, what the Book of Abraham calls intelligences, are more intelligent than others. These spirits are the same things that are taught about as kami. The only difference is that we believe in an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God who is above all these kami, and this all-loving God is who we singularly pray to. And with us, all these things make up the multiple personalities of the collective unconscious. If there be two spirits, one shall be more intelligent than the other. Yet these two spirits notwithstanding, one is more intelligent than the other, have no beginning. They existed before, and they shall have no end. They shall exist after, for they are nolam, or eternal. And the Lord said unto me, these two facts do exist, that there are two spirits, one being more intelligent than the other. There shall be another more intelligent than they, and I, the Lord God, I am more intelligent than they all. And now I shall read a quote from Carl Jung. We are entirely free to choose which point of view we take. It will in any case be an arbitrary decision. There is, however, a strong empirical reason why we should cultivate thoughts that can never be proved. It is that they are known to be useful. Man positively needs general ideas and convictions that will give a meaning to his life and enable him to find a place for himself in the universe. He can stand the most incredible hardships when he is convinced that they make sense. He is crushed when, on top of all of his misfortunes, he has to admit that he is taking part in a tale told by an idiot. It is the role of religious symbols to give a meaning to the life of man. The Pueblo Indians believe that they are the sons of Father Sun, and this belief endows their life with a perspective and a goal that goes far beyond their limited existence. It gives them ample space for the unfolding of personality and permits them a full life as complete persons. Their plight is infinitely more satisfactory than that of a man in our own civilization, who knows that he will remain, nothing more than an underdog, with no inner meaning to his life. A sense of a wider meaning to one's existence is what raises a man beyond mere getting and spending. If he lacks this sense, he is lost and miserable. Such a myth, however, consists of symbols that have not been invented consciously. They have happened. It was not the man Jesus who created the myth of the God-man. It existed for many centuries before his birth. He himself was seized by this symbolic idea, which, as St. Mark tells us, lifted him out of the narrow life of the Nazarene carpenter. So with all of this talk of multiple personalities, I would ask you to incorporate one single unifying personality, that of the collective unconscious himself, the personality of Jesus Christ. Let his influence guide you. Let him be your personal trainer. Let him be your spiritual guide in meditation. Let him teach you the measures of success. Let him lead you to victory. Why do we forget our past life? Why do we forget it all? Why do we not remember the future? Why doesn't God show himself to us? Why must the scriptures be so reliant on faith instead of cold hard evidence? Evidence makes things boring. It puts a foot down on what is and is not, making things black or white. Until evidence comes around, a thing could be anything. Those who lack faith lack imagination. They lack the ability to see things as they truly can be instead of what they are. Moroni said, "Faith is things which are hoped for and not seen. Wherefore dispute not because ye see not, for ye receive no witness until after the trial of your faith." And Paul said, "Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Faith means the future remains undetermined and is clay to be molded into whatever you want it to be. Faith means doing something that you had never done before, what you thought you could not do. Faith means attempting to see your surroundings when it is pitch black. Faith means loving when you have every reason to hate. Faith means forgiving when you know revenge can be satisfying. Faith means rejoicing when you should be sorrowing. Faith means your burdens are light when they should be heavy. Faith means your personal problems don't exist. Faith means understanding another when you want them to be so wrong. Faith means being humble when another corrects you. Faith means being rich when you are poor. Faith means being yourself and no one else, even if you are made to be the fool. Faith means grabbing what should be unreachable. Faith means finding beauty in something ugly. Faith means being strong when the world sees you as being weak. Faith means being content when you should be frustrated. Faith means having fun in a boring setting. Faith means being calm when you should be worried. Faith means working when you want to be lazy. Faith means you keep running when you are exhausted. Faith means being brave in the face of danger. Faith means continuing to stand up when the world knocks you down. Faith means standing when you are lame, seeing when you are blind, hearing when you are deaf, and speaking when you are mute. Faith means existing when you should not exist. Faith means being free in an unfree world. While there is a limit to what you can do, faith can take you there and try you to break your limits. Faith means believing in impossible things. Faith means believing in something greater than yourself when others would mock you. Faith means being a rebel. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. While there is nothing more freeing than making your reality, nothing is more terrifying than the responsibility that comes with it. Faith is the hardest trial of all, but if you can manage to believe in the unbelievable, then you are one step closer to knowing the unknowable and then doing the undoable. Then you break free from the shackles of your reality. God is dead, I say. Not that I am going atheist, but that the world at large seems to move on with its life as though God were dead. However, I think we can also apply this phrase to the atonement of Jesus Christ. But let me tell you a story, for in the year 1889, a horse collapsed in a town square from exhaustion. The driver got out a whip and began punishing the horse mercilessly, when out of nowhere a madman rushed up to the fallen horse to protect it, throwing his arms around it and cried, "It is okay, I understand you." This man, Friedrich Nietzsche, and he wrote those immortal words, "God is dead." These words would become the most misunderstood phrase in the world, for in the year 2018 in Twin Falls, Idaho, an LDS church was vandalized with those very words, "God is dead." Contrary to popular opinion, this phrase does not mean a secret combination among disenchanted atheists. There are no atheist professors that want every theist student to sign a document that says, "God is dead." No, this is not the meaning of the phrase, to say he never existed in the first place. Not even the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints can catch a glimpse of its true meaning and purpose. In each video I make on the atonement of Jesus Christ, I have consistently avoided answering one central question. What put God in a tyrannical position? What cornered him in which he had to choose between having all of his disobedient children going to hell forever, or having his beloved son brutally tortured and sacrificed. Behold, no unclean thing can dwell with God. Behold, I will tell you who cornered God. The answer came not from an apostle or high authority of the LDS Church, not from an ancient apostle either. Behold, this prophet was not ever ordained to the holy priesthood, neither did he believe in God, yet had he light enough to say what all were too timid, too scared to say. This man told us, Friedrich Nietzsche. He said, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. As we journey through this life, we realized our consciousness was imprisoned in a fleshy vessel. We came kicking and screaming. We realized life is pain. According to psychologist Otto Rank, birth is the most traumatic experience in life, and then life is simply one traumatic experience after another. For the small child, its simple mind cannot possibly comprehend any gray area. These things are either the most joyful experience ever, or the most tragic. The little babe jumps for joy or sobs profusely. The denial of cake is tantamount to unjust torture, and getting to eat the cake is tantamount to heavenly bliss. As adults, we look down and think, oh, you poor child, oh, babe who sucked life. You have no idea how hard reality is. You have no idea how hard life really is. You have it easy. Yelling and screaming, unable to communicate any other way. It is only because of an underdeveloped brain that small children forget their traumatic experiences. But if they understood the concept of death fully, and held on to each traumatic moment, perhaps they would be tempted to say, curse my parents for bringing me into this cruel world.
Everything that lives is designed to end. We are perpetually trapped in a never-ending spiral of life and death. Is this a curse? Or some kind of punishment? I often think about the God who blessed us with this cryptic puzzle, and wonder if we'll ever have the chance to kill him.
Men fall from the sky. The gods hurl thunderbolts. Innocents die. That's how it starts. The fever, the rage, the feeling of powerlessness that turns good men cruel.
We fell in attempting to take our first steps, having partaken of forbidden knowledge, of pain we could not endure, a cross too hard to bear, in an attempt to walk. We fell. Down we fell while on a path to becoming like God, even as we became greedy for more of his forbidden knowledge of good and evil. The one thing every war is fought over, every conflict of interest. For as we fell, God said, behold, man has become as one of us.
There was a time above, a time before. There were perfect things, diamond absolutes. Things fall, things on earth. And what falls is fallen.
Why do we fall? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
But in attempting to pick ourselves back up, we made up
a beautiful lie.
Mankind became confused and invented murder. How could we worship such a God that would allow us to fall so? What wretched being lies above us that saves not the sick and dying child?
The problem of evil in the world. The problem of absolute virtue. The problem of you on top of everything else. You above all. Because that's what God is. Horus, Apollo, Jehovah, Kal-El, Clark, Joseph, Kent. See, what we call God depends upon our tribe, Clark Joe. Because God is tribal. God takes sides. No man in the sky intervened when I was a boy to deliver me from Daddy's fist and abominations. I figured out way back. If God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he is all good, then he cannot be all-powerful.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
God would reach out to Israel many times, but they consistently rejected him. Why? Jehovah the Mighty? Yet he seemed to struggle to maintain a large group of loyal followers, no matter which nation he entered. Everywhere he went, people rejected him, turning him away. And Satan came among them, saying, I am also a son of God. And he commanded them, saying, Believe it not. And they believed it not. And they loved Satan more than God. And men began from that time forth to be carnal, sensual, and devilish. Feeling powerless, Jehovah, who, were it possible that man could number the particles of the earth, yea, millions of earths like this, it would not be a beginning to the number of his creations. He wept over the earth, and from his tears came a flood and wiped the world clean. And he beheld Satan, and he had a great chain in his hand, and it veiled the whole face of the earth with darkness. And he looked up and laughed, and his angels rejoiced. After being sustained by religion and God for thousands of years, according to Jacques Lacan, these things became so ingrained in our psychology that without God, we began to make religion out of secular things to replace him. Mankind turned to false idols. They worshipped money, the body, the ego, and other things. They then cared not for their brothers. They cut each other open, spilling blood to be sucked into the earth. They cut open each other and ripped out hearts to make human sacrifice. They stormed castles to rape and pillage, and had the audacity to say, God told me to do it. If you found God to be an almighty being, he would be so far above us that he couldn't connect with us. No limits or fear of death. There would be no self-reflection, and therefore no consciousness in God. If this God didn't have empathy to know the human condition and suffer what we suffer, you would indeed say to him, Thou vile and cruel God, how dare you sit on a comfy topless throne high above, and use the earth as thy footstool? How dare you command us to love you? How dare you give us commandments of any kind? You know nothing of the human condition. You know nothing of fear, of pain, of sorrow, or of death.
And now, you will fly to him, and you will battle him to the death. Black and blue, fight night. The greatest gladiator match in the history of the world. God versus man. Day versus night.
In the beginning was the gospel preached through the Son, and the gospel was the Word, and the Word was with the Son, and the Son was with God, and the Son was of God. And the same Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth.
You'll be an outcast. A freak. They'll kill him.
How? You'll be a god to them.
Mighty Jehovah was made flesh and came before us as Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He preached peace and righteousness. He performed many miracles and amassed a large following of faithful disciples. However, his preaching became hard for many to hear. When a large group of people abandoned him, he turned to his 12 disciples and asked, Will ye also go away? And Peter answered by asking that if not follow Christ, who could they go to who would sufficiently fill the void in their heart? Behold, when such a powerful yet humble man came before us, Plato predicted what would happen to him. We would not believe such a righteous man, for we never saw such a righteous man. We would demand proof. that he could remain so moral even under the most vilest and most cruel of circumstances. For if he seem to be just, he will be honored and rewarded, and then we shall not know whether he is just for the sake of justice or for the sake of honors and rewards. Therefore let him be clothed in justice only, and have no other covering, and he must be imagined in a state of life the opposite of the former. Let him be the best of men, and let him be thought the worst. Then he will have been put to the proof, and we shall see whether he will be affected by the fear of infamy and its consequences. And let him continue thus for the honor of death, being just and seeming to be unjust. When both have reached the uttermost extreme, the one of justice and the other of injustice, let judgment be given, which of them is the happier of the two. To which it is said of this perfectly moral and just man, that he will be scourged, racked, bound, will have his eyes burned out, and at last, after suffering every kind of evil, he will be impaled. And that is exactly what happened to Christ. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, and smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shears is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken, and he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. He was resurrected, yes, but he couldn't just die spiritually and physically. He had to die morally. A great apostasy was inevitable, and we killed him. For Paul knew the time will come when we would not endure sound doctrine, but after our own lusts shall we heap to ourselves teachers, having itching ears, and we shall turn away our ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. He said, When ye come together in church, I hear there be divisions among you, and I partly believe it, for there must also be heresies among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest among you. He said that Christ would not return to the earth except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, shewing himself that he is God. And for those who called themselves disciples, those who dared stand by that man who represented that same God who brought you into a cruel world, Christ says of you, They shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another, and many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Many dragged the name of Christ through the mud, killing and saying, We are good, and all else are evil. They thought they were preserving the legacy of Christ, when in reality they had their foot on their God with a spear ready to kill him at a second's notice, saying,
You were never a god. You were never even a man.
Perhaps if they saw the humanity in God, they would not have killed him, but we refused even to look. The cross became a shadow on a cave wall, an immense, frightful shadow. Christianity became a hollow of its former self. Men worshipped, but they knew not what. They carried on traditions long after the meaning was forgotten and dead. The doctrine they corrupted and twisted for their own needs. And many came preaching for money alone, amassing large cult-like behavior among the masses, and embracing fully slave morality, killing and damning to hell any who opposed. Man claimed to worship God, but he was deceived into killing him instead. Men have come to speak of the revelation as somewhat long ago given and done, as if God were dead. The injury to faith throttles the preacher, and the goodliness of institutions becomes an uncertain and inarticulate voice.
I give you just a few words from Harry Emerson Fosdick, in which he said, "If Jesus should come back to earth now, hear the mythologies built up around him, see the creedalism, denominationalism, sacramentalism carried on in his name, he would certainly say, if this is Christianity, I am not a Christian." And in Smith's Bible Dictionary, written by 73 noted divines and Bible students, the statement was made that one must not expect to find the gospel of Holy Writ in its perfection upon the earth today. He said, "It is not to thus be found perfect either in any fragments of Christianity or in the Christianity or any fragments thereof."
Is it any wonder then that Friedrich Nietzsche asked, "Where is God gone? Is he totally gone from the world?" He called out, "I mean to tell you, we have killed him, you and I, we are his murderers. But how have we done it? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the whole horizon? What did we do when we loosened this earth from its sun? Whither does it now move? Whither do we move? Away from all suns? Do we not dash on unceasingly? Backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an above and below? Do we not stray, as though infinite nothingness? Does not empty space breathe upon us? Has it not become colder? Does not night come on continually, darker and darker? Shall we not have to light lanterns in the morning? Do we not hear the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell the divine putrefaction? For even gods putrefy. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we console ourselves, the most murderous of all murderers, the holiest and the mightiest that the world has hitherto possessed, has bled to death under our knife? Who will wipe the blood from us? With what water could we cleanse ourselves? What lustrums, what sacred games shall we have to devise? Is not the magnitude of this deed too great for us? Shall we not ourselves have to become gods merely to seem worthy of it? There never was a greater event, and on account of it, all who are born after us belong to a higher history than any history hitherto. What are these churches now if they are not tombs and monuments of God? For Nietzsche, the death of God came not with loud praise, but with mourning. For with God dead, all morality dies. With God dead, there is nothing to tether us to the sun, for we have severed the connection. There is no foundation to uphold the morals we claim for ourselves, that we have claimed for so long. All hell would break loose, all blood would be spilled to atone for what we have done to God. The realization would create a large chasm, to which an abyss of despair and nihilism would swallow the world. For Nietzsche, the only way out of this inevitable nihilism is to become gods ourselves. He tells us to rise above nihilism and create a new center for morals, with art and culture. Yet God remains dead. In the secular world, we seem to have replaced any need for God by explaining away his mysteries with scientific knowledge. In this secular world, more people realize the meaninglessness of life without God. We may find cures for cancer, we may find the solution to controlling the weather, we may learn to live in harmony with nature, we may find a way to end all conflicts, we may engineer significant structures, we may discover the secret to eternal youth. But what does it matter in the face of inevitable death of the universe? Everything will be snatched away from us in the instant. We are still only a speck of dust in the grand scheme of things. Many seek to replace God through new moral systems, but they fail, every last one of them. Sartre says we are born without meaning, but then we can create our own meaning. But how does one create something out of nothing, without a block to sculpt from whence comes the sculpture? Kierkegaard tells us to take a leap of faith. But how can we tell where we are leaping if there is nothing to leap towards? Are we just leaping to our inevitable demise? Pascal says we should wager on the existence of God and fear his judgment. But living in fear is just a path to suicide and slave morality. Camus says we should embrace the absurd. However, it is to embrace such an empty and cold thing. De Beauvoir would have us make a performance out of life like actors on a stage. But what if we are acting alone and no one pays us any attention? Does such desire for acceptance in the community only leave us empty in a sad and narcissistic act? What if the world refuses to look at us? What if the universe never looks our way? What if we are alone in the universe? When we face death, do we only face becoming puppets to the universe? When we face death, our life is like a puppet on a festival cart. As soon as one string is cut, it crumbles and fades. Perhaps the only way to derive meaning in a world where God is dead is to become gods ourselves, as Nietzsche suggested. But indeed, the death of God forced us to confront nihilism and choose to abandon all morality or stay true to it. Some may say that such things as science or religion are suitable bases for morality. Still, without God to stand as judge, there is no true justice in the world, as so many criminals go unpunished. So many children go without being cared for, even as we all receive the same judgment upon death. Nothingness. Without God, all things fall to immorality, the world itself becoming a living sociopath.
And here you are. I know you two feel the same. That this world is utterly meaningless. As far as I'm concerned, my brother was everything. And now, everything must die!
All around me I see people arguing over individual systems of morality, destroying each other's foundations for morality. The arrogance itself absurd, as they say, all I know is right, and you must know that you are wrong. Not humble enough to face reality and say, no, 'tis I that is wrong.
This world is divided. They are a primitive species, unevolved and at war with one another, too separate to be one. Their free will must be ripped from them, like the other worlds, given absolution in one glorious belief, to serve him. This world will fall, like all the others. For Darkseid. For Darkseid.
The death of God may have awakened a greater evil than has ever been known, dividing us more than ever before, even as we face pure extinction and cease to exist. Death is coming. He is hungry. He has found you, and he smells your fear. Ready or not, here he comes. We may need to resurrect God by uniting together, learning and following God's example of sacrifice. The only way to make meaning for life is to sacrifice for others, to make another's existence meaningful in the moment. All attempts for self-meaning are futile, as you enclose everything around you, and the mountains fall on you and cover you. When things become too hard to bear, allow your fellow humans to sacrifice for you, and you for them. God said, "Love me." We said, "Maybe." He said, "Look at me." And we turned away. So he said instead, "Hate me, break me, crush me, impale me, step on me, kill me, crucify me, make me bleed. Let me feel as hurt as you, then promise me you'll never let us go. So be a humanist, have faith in humanity. We killed God, and only we can resurrect him. But indeed, one more thing. Why the Son, and not the Father? Because like Father, like Son. The Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. For what things soever he doeth, these also doeth the Son likewise."
However, the possibility of a different future also exists. A future is not given to you. It is something you must take for yourself.
When Zarathustra came out of his 10 years of total isolation from the world, he first praised the sun. Then on his way down the mountain, he came across an old saint who looked for roots, but he found none. Zarathustra says he loves mankind and comes down to bring a gift to them. But the old saint mocks him, telling him it is better to love God and gives gifts unto him, and not mankind. He says that the one should not love beings that are so imperfect, but only the being above, who created all things and is perfect. So the old saint is out to praise God in the forest, away from all mankind. Zarathustra laughs with the man, but then says to himself as he walks away, "Could it be possible this old saint in his forest has not yet heard of it, that God is dead?" In like manner, when I come across many religious folks and hear them speak praises of an invisible God who has no face and cannot be possibly seen or heard by anyone, I think the same as Zarathustra in my heart. Know you not that you worship nothing, that your sacraments and rituals have lost all meaning? Know you not that God is dead? And when the madman from the gay science lit a lantern and ran into the marketplace, asking if anyone had seen God, he was mocked and ridiculed. But these were not religious folk, but rather modernists who no longer believed in God and attempted to push society beyond him. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. "Has he got lost?" asked one. "Did he lose his way like a child?" asked another. "Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Immigrated?" Thus they yelled and laughed. To these he told, God is dead, and gave them a warning of nihilism. But indeed, when all were silent and confused, the madman was remorseful, saying, "I have come too early." Note that when Nietzsche says God is dead, he is not referring to a literal death of a big man in the sky, but rather the death of meaning and truth. As our world increasingly moves away from God, we have replaced him with secular things, meaningless things. Man can't help but worship something, anything. God is dead in this world we have created. Nietzsche knew that this would bring about widespread nihilism, and with nihilism would come despair and abandonment of all morality. You may say that for now you can deal with the meaninglessness of life. You may say that the inevitability of the death of all things into oblivion makes life sweet at the moment. But the fact that nothing matters in the eternity is something we are all going to have to confront. As Nietzsche says, if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. If you haven't gazed into the abyss yet, Nietzsche seems to suggest that there will be a worldwide cataclysmic nexus event that will force us to confront that God is dead in our modern society. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it to themselves. And the Doctrine and Covenants seems to hint similarly, for prophets all over the world have tried to warn us of pending nihilism and despair just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. This modern world has left us weak, impatient, and standing on sand that will be easily washed away.
Things you own end up owning you.
For after prophet's testimony cometh the testimony of earthquakes, that shall cause groanings in the midst of her, and men shall fall upon the ground, and shall not be able to stand. And also cometh the testimony of the voice of thunderings, and the voice of lightnings, and the voice of tempests, and the voice of the waves of the sea heaving themselves beyond their bounds. And all things shall be in commotion, and surely men's hearts shall fail them, for fear shall come upon all people. In the face of such terrible things, men and women everywhere who are not sufficiently prepared will have to make a choice to stay true to morality or abandon it, and sadly, more will abandon it than stay true. And so it is for these reasons that I call Friedrich Nietzsche a prophet.
I see. It seems this Nietzsche was quite the profound thinker. Or perhaps he skipped right past profound and went straight to crazy instead. Oh well.
I would now like to further analyze these concepts through the anime series Death Note. Death Note opens with top-of-his-class high school student Light Yagami, who is bored with the people around him and frustrated with the rotten world, even as he has a textbook open that is talking about overpopulation, which leads to the destruction of forests and pollution to the increased extinction rate of many species. He one day finds a notebook that was dropped by a Shinigami, a god of death, Ryuk. After reading the instructions, he finds that he has the power in his hands to kill off anyone he pleases by simply writing their name in the death note and picturing their face in his mind. He then takes it upon himself to rid the world of those he judges to be unredeemable criminals. He takes on the mantle of Kira, taken from the English word killer.
Then, and only then, the world will start moving in the right direction. It'll be a new world, free of injustice and populated by people who I've judged to be honest, kind, and hardworking. And I will become the god of this new world.
However, in the very next episode, he is confronted by his foil, L, a world-renowned detective who is determined to catch Light. L highlights problems with Light's philosophy and calls him evil. Each subsequent episode seems to be what would happen if Alfred Hitchcock ever made an anime, as we get a thrilling cat-and-mouse chase. Wherever Light turns, L seems to be one step ahead of him. Right from the ending of episode 2, when L and Light shout in unison,
I am justice!
The entire show focuses on what justice means. Most media simply puts justice as meaning the good guys will always win, but Death Note complicates things. You may have heard of the quote attributed to Winston Churchill, "History is written by the victors." In other words, justice may only be determined by whoever is in power. Therefore, in a world devoid of God, a supreme judge, it may be reasonable to suggest that justice is just a social construct made up to justify the victor's actions. Throughout Death Note, several characters talk about justice, but we never seem to get a clear definition as to what exactly justice means in this world. Near the end, Light, while pretending to want to catch himself, seems to sum up exactly what justice in this world means.
If Kira gets caught, then that makes him evil. But if he wins and rules the world, then I guess he's justice.
Justice to these characters is nothing more than a game, as in the end, when Light is caught, there is no talk of justice prevailing, but instead they talk about winning and losing. More specifically, the show asks, what does justice mean when nobody's looking? From the Book of Mormon we read, "Now if there was no law given, if a man murdered he should die. Would he be afraid he would die if he should murder? And also, if there was no law given against sin, men would not be afraid to sin." Now, this isn't to say that without God we would all be rapists and murderers, but it is simply a question of how easy it is to sin when there are no consequences involved. For this reason, violent video games are popular because you can kill without any real-world consequences. And while it is naive to say that without God we would all be rapists, pornography has made it so that we can rape and objectify people without anyone forcing us to consider what we have done. It all has to do with maintaining reputation. As Light tells us,
humans will always try to maintain appearances when they're in public. That's just how we are. But this is how they really feel. Most are too afraid to support me as they're worried about what others will think. Many would rather deny my existence. But on the internet, where you can remain anonymous, support for Kira is growing.
From the Republic of Plato, we get a story in which a man finds a ring that makes him invisible. Afterward, he promptly rapes the queen, kills the king, and takes over the kingdom, all because he knew he could get away with it. But perhaps if we knew that there were universal laws, and that every action we took would either lead to our condemnation or that we would be given great gifts. Only God can determine such things. The closest thing we could get to any kind of god in Death Note are the Shinigami, gods of death. However, unlike the Abrahamic god, these gods are fallible, bored, lazy, not all-knowing, not all-powerful, and have lost any reason for their existence. If they write humans' names in their death notes to extend their own lives, then they are only mocked for working so hard. Death Note is very clearly a world devoid of any supreme judge of the universe. When Light first gets the Death Note, he is told that he won't be punished for using it, as he will not go to heaven or hell when he dies.
So then, you're saying I can use the Death Note all I want and I won't be punished?
However, we later find out that this is a universal concept in the show, that without a supreme creator of the universe, a supreme judge, there is no reward or punishment after death. All humans shall cease to exist in the void. This void, that Light initially ignores, quickly catches up to him when he is forced to stare into the abyss. No one truly understands what it means to die until they are about to. Not knowing what happens after death is scary, and being unable to understand what it means to cease to exist is even scarier. The closest that we can think of what non-existence could imply is when we are in the deepest part of sleep, but even then, we are still very conscious and can dream. Having lost to the police and on the precipice of bleeding to death, Light pleads with Ryuk to kill the police instead of him, as he screams and cries, "I don't want to die!" So in a world devoid of God, there is no heaven or hell. No matter what you do while you're alive, everybody goes to the same place once you die. Death is equal. Without any reward or punishment after death, is there any real justice or universal laws? Can little children who go their whole lives in starvation ever receive mercy? And if there is no justice or laws, then can we say if anything is right or wrong? Could there then be any redemption or mercy? Is there then any real universal truth? From the Book of Mormon's perspective, no. Therefore, according to justice, the plan of redemption cannot be brought about only on conditions of repentance of men in this probationary state, yea, this preparatory state. For except it were for these conditions, mercy could not take effect, except it should destroy the work of justice. Now the work of justice could not be destroyed. If so, God would cease to be God. And now the plan of mercy should not be brought about except an atonement should be made. Therefore God himself atoneth for the sins of the world to bring about the plan of mercy, to appease the demands of justice, that God might be a perfect, just God, and merciful God also. Now repentance could not come unto men except there were a punishment, which also was eternal as the life of the soul should be, a fixed opposite to the plan of happiness, which was as eternal also as the life of the soul. Now how could a man repent except he should sin? How could he sin if there was no law? How could there be a law save there was a punishment? But the show Death Note seems to ask one more central question of far greater importance. What if God was an atheist? The question may seem absurd and crazy at first, but I want you to really think about this. That is to say, what if God never had any positive or negative consequences to his actions? Nothing exists without a purpose, and we cannot have a purpose unless our actions have certain consequences. It is the law itself that binds us to reality. It distinguishes right from wrong, gives us options, gives us focus. With no law, there is no breaking of the law, no consequences. So if God has no God, you are implying that he has no purpose. Indeed, Death Note shows us what such a God would be like. Light Yagami is an atheist, but he fashions himself a god. By killing off criminals all over the world, he also begins killing off anyone who thinks to defy him and catch him. He wants the world to know of his existence. He wants his will to be the only law in the entire world. While even his father is out to catch Kira, he keeps it all a secret from his own family, putting on an act for the world. He even fashions himself a martyr, or a Christ-like savior, who is sacrificing himself for the greater good of humanity. As he says,
"Even if it means sacrificing my own mind and soul, it's worth it, because the world can't go on like this."
But what he is doing is anything but Christ-like. By killing all criminals, he makes himself evil. By cleaning up a rotten world, he would have to contend with a rotten self. His perfect world can only come about with millions of people being dead. All are sacrificial pawns. No one is safe, not even those closest to him. After several years, religions start popping up, like televangelists and secret cults dedicated to worshipping Kira, even long after he is dead. Many atheists have pondered what would happen if they died and met God, but I want to propose this interesting proposal, this scenario. Let's say that you are an atheist, or you worship a variant of God. You oppose the real God your whole life and never consider him to be real, but a fabric of humans' fanciful imagination. However, you also dedicate yourself to achieving great things for the benefit of all humanity. But you start to realize that the more you push yourself, the more no one will understand or even begin to appreciate all you do. You also desire to push your body beyond its limits to the point of becoming a perfectionist. But you run your body to the ground and realize that your goals are way too high. Many others mock you and often say you can't do it. As a result, you start to realize there is no justice for you. You realize how meaningless life is, until finally you die. Upon death, you meet God, and he is absolutely nothing like you imagined. He is a supreme being who is so far above you that it makes you feel that much more worthless. You are certain of your fate as you spiral into despair, and you accept defeat. In one last effort to save yourself from hell, you attempt to be friends with God and see some of yourself in him. You even offer to wash God's feet. But like Skyron from Greek mythology, as you are washing God's feet, he will just kick you into hell. A similar fate befalls El, even as he attempts to be friends with Light, only to admit defeat and try to atone for trying to catch Kira by washing Light's feet. His high intellect made him the greatest detective, but few ever knew the real El, and even fewer knew his real name. It is fitting that Light would push a Shinigami named Ren, who could see El's real name, to kill El. REM stands for Rapid Eye Movement, the deepest part of sleep. Kira punished him, El, for even defying God of the New World. Such a God who kills without mercy, without care for consequences, is not a God, but a very childish individual who hates to lose.
Just what do you mean?
Well, I'm also childish and I hate to lose. That's how I know.
He is not all-knowing. He does not know your heart, but he punishes you nonetheless. I don't believe in this God, for this is not God. But there is mercy in this world. There is justice, truly without a shadow of a doubt, because there is a law. There is a God who lives by the law, even as he commands his children to live the law. He said we are his friends if we live the law. That is, we are even as he is, gods, if we live by the law. For by the law are gods made. But all have broken the law to some degree or another. Justice demands payment. Are you able to pay? No, you are not. For though we see your sins do not compare to the worst of humanity, compared to the majesty and unbelievable righteousness in God, the distinction between your sins and the murderer is near non-existent, as finity is nothing compared to infinity. and no unclean thing can dwell with God, because you would not feel worthy enough to be near him. You would tell him you don't belong there, yet he wants you there. He knows your heart, your passions, your drive, and he still wants to dwell with you, for he wants you to see the print of the nails in his hands. He wants you to know he was wounded too. He feels your pain. His empathy for you is boundless. He stood between you and oblivion and took it full force. By integrating his shadow, you and he became equals, and he called you his friend. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. He came as a man before us to show us love and compassion. He understands you, yet we killed him and drove nails into his hands because we did not understand him. So we crucified him. But he never stopped loving us. Why? He came not to save us from his wrath, but to save us from ourselves. He came to redeem us. He came to show you your future self and what it is that is possible for you. Even so, we killed truth and meaning. We killed God. Eventually, we will have to confront nihilism in this world. When we are unable to immediately talk with God face to face as a man speaketh unto his friend, it is easy to think that there is no God. When you are alone, no one to watch or criticize you, what do? If faced with a meaningless universe, no consequences to face for any action, no one to scrutinize you, then your true self comes out to maintain morality or abandon it. But then, what does it matter if there is no universal law, as there is no difference between right and wrong? Then you should just close your eyes forever. But that is not your fate, for there is a God, there is an afterlife, there is justice, there is mercy. You have a partner above. He is your God, your friend, your brother. And with the Father, you are a son or daughter with divine potential. Though you stumbled hard and fell, he still loves you. More than you deserve. Far more. He wants to embrace you, though even as he embraces you, he bleeds. For embracing you, he feels your pain and atones for your sins. Your sins are like the needles of a porcupine, but God hugs you tightly nonetheless. Would you not then cry into his arms and wet his bosom with your tears? Therefore, you would not want to sin any more, and are redeemed. Come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. This is the God I believe in. This is the God I worship. To be as overly ambitious as you want, and still receive justice and mercy in the end.
What a plight. The entire human race in free fall. Every man, woman, and child in it, physically tumbling toward permanent death, spiritually plunging toward eternal anguish. Is that what life was meant to be? Is this the grand finale of the human experience? Are we all just hanging in a cold canyon somewhere in an indifferent universe? Each of us searching for a toehold, each of us seeking for something to help, something to grip, with nothing but the feeling of sand sliding under our fingers. Nothing to save us, nothing to hold on to, much less anything to hold on to us. Is our only purpose in life an empty existential exercise, simply to leap as high as we can, hang on for our prescribed 70 years and 10, and then fail, then fall, and keep falling forever? The answer to those questions is an unequivocal and eternal no. So today, we celebrate the gift of victory over every fall we've ever experienced, every sorrow we've ever known, every discouragement we've ever had, every fear we've ever faced, to say nothing of resurrection from death and forgiveness for our sins. That victory is available to us because of events that transpired on a weekend precisely like this more than 2 millennia ago in Jerusalem. Beginning in the spiritual anguish of the Garden of Gethsemane, moving to the crucifixion on a cross at Calvary, and concluding on a beautiful Sunday morning inside a donated tomb, a sinless, pure, and holy man, the very Son of God himself, did what no other deceased person had ever done nor ever could do. Under his own power, he rose from death, never to have his body separated from his spirit again. Of his own volition, he shed the burial linen with which he had been bound, carefully putting the burial napkin that had been placed over his face in a place by itself, the scripture says. That first Easter sequence of atonement and resurrection constitutes the most consequential moment, the most generous gift, the most excruciating pain, and the most majestic manifestation of pure love ever to be demonstrated in the history of this world. Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, suffered, died, and rose from death in order that he could, like lightning in a summer storm, grasp us as we fell, held us with his might, and through our obedience to his commandments, lift us to eternal life. How great, how glorious, how complete redemption's grand design, where justice, love, and mercy meet in harmony divine.
Gender is probably not just the most controversial, but nuanced topic. Its link to sex seems almost impossible to disconnect, as many of those who identify as the opposite gender want to change their bodies to match. They want their outer appearance to match their inner feelings, and feel great distress if denied permission. Ben Shapiro famously says often, "Facts don't care about your feelings." However, telling this to a transgender person almost always results in greater feelings of frustration. We might want to tell these people that they should learn to live with the biology they were born with and to love who they simply are, to be transvestites instead of going all in. But while this is a sympathetic approach, it isn't empathetic. Humans are, on average, emotional creatures at their core, so their beliefs more often stem from solid emotional feelings than any scientifically proven fact. So we need to take wisdom from this quote by Theodore Roosevelt. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The reason on what makes people with transgender feelings have such high self-terminating rates seems to be up in the air at this point. Whether it is the feelings themselves or the abuse they feel, transgender people deserve more empathy than they usually receive. But one thing remains. I will only speak the truth. I must convey my mind. Let's define some terms. Gender, the psychology of an individual in association with their biological sex. Sex, the physical structure and makeup of a body associated with genitals and hormones. What is a woman? An adult human female possessing eggs and the natural ability to be impregnated. What is a man? An adult human male possessing sperm and the natural ability of impregnating. What is a transgender person? A person who feels more akin to the opposite sex biology than the biology they were born with. What is an intersex person? A person whose genitalia is ambiguous, deformed, but can still be identified as male or female. No in-between sex has been identified as being both male and female. No true third gamete associated with a third gender has been found either, apart from eggs and sperm. What is the third gender, or non-binary gender? An imaginary category of gender that manifests itself in no observable, discernible, or physical way. Those who think they can explain the non-binary gender actually can't, because telling someone what something isn't is not the same as telling someone what something is. In many Native American tribes, there is what is called being two-spirited. The term is a modern invention from 1990 used to describe an old idea where a person is exhibiting qualities typically associated with the opposite sex. We might say that a man has both the spirit of a man and a woman, thus being two-spirited, simply because he enjoys typically feminine things. This person is put in a ceremonial role-playing in which he portrays both genders, though he wouldn't usually be considered transgender. None of this negates the original biological sex the individual was born with. Takatapui is a Polynesian term from the Maori language, which refers to homosexuals. As the Dictionary of Maori Language from 1832 defines the term as an intimate companion of the same sex. In modern times, the term has since become an umbrella for anyone in the LGBTQ+ community. Fa'afafine is a curious social construct in Samoan culture. The term refers to boys who are raised as girls, often because the family had all boys and wanted a girl.
Fa'afafines, they have the flair and the creativity of the female gender, but they also have the brutal strength of male gender.
Fa'afafine are a diverse group in their own right. Some feel great distress over being raised as girls and outright reject being submitted as ones. Others feel content being more effeminate than the average man, yet still affirm that they are males, while others seem to be outright possessed by the spirit of Fa'afafine, or the feminine spirit, as Carl Jung would say they are anima-possessed, would seek to live fully as the opposite sex, and often would seek medically transitions. It is hard for me not to bring up the case of David Reimer, who was also raised female without knowing he was born male as a part of a social experiment by Dr. John Money, to disastrous results. Still, I'll allow the audience to do their own research on that topic. Now we need to talk about Margaret Mead, an anthropologist who actively lived with and studied many Polynesian tribes. She took detailed notes on how many of the tribes she lived with dealt with the topic of gender. The Arapish tribe of Papua New Guinea is a very feminine-based tribe, where both the males and females are super kind and gentle to each other, to the point that they don't even have a word for rape, and would have a hard time understanding the concept. They would say that the father and mother would give birth to the children. The mother would give the physical birth, while the father would go out into a field simultaneously to act out the birth process as a spiritual birth to ward off as many evil spirits away from the mother as possible. The Mundigamor tribe, on the other hand, is a much more masculine-based society. They are rather harshly aggressive with each other. Due to women having less upper body strength than the men, they would more often resort to sneak attacks. Nevertheless, the men and women would rape and abuse each other constantly and call it romantic. The Chambori tribe is feminine-based, yet has a more precise division between males and females than the previous tribes, yet the traditional roles were observed by Mead to be reversed. The women appeared to do all the hard manual labor, wearing plain clothes, while the men would seem to laze around, playing dress-up and wearing makeup. On its surface, this society would appear to be a win for gender theorists, a matriarchal community that seemed to be dominated by women. Still, Mead should have mentioned that it is in fact not so. While neither gender competed to dominate the other, it was still considered inappropriate for women to participate in politics and power, as it was the man's job. This goes back to the idea that while there have been women rulers and leaders, there has never been a true matriarchy. All cultures are and were rather patriarchies to one degree or another. When Rainey Eisler was researching the history of patriarchy in her book, The Chalice and the Blade, Our Past, Our Future, she discovered that while some cultures were more equal among the sexes than others traced their lineage through the mother, others worshipped centered around a goddess, and other cultures were pure patriarchies, there never was a culture in which it was purely a matriarchy. There was never a society where it was a group of all females, which made up all the rulers and excluded all men from positions of power. Often, when it appears that there is a matriarchy in a culture, it is when the men are busy doing things elsewhere, while the women stay behind to take care of the homeland. Even though society can influence the sexes' gender roles, it should be understood that there is also a solid biological element to the whole thing. Some communities are more feminine and others more masculine. Some women are more masculine than some men, and some men more feminine than some women. However, while there are some women more muscular than some men, on average, men are 3 times stronger than the average woman. The strongest person who ever lived is a man, as it is that the majority of men are more masculine than the majority of women, and this is an undeniable fact. As a result, men are the ones who are historically known to be the warriors across all cultures. For this reason, it is nearly impossible to find armor specifically made for women. In most areas, it is non-existent. While there are tribes where some women would help out in warfare, it is the common consensus among all cultures that the man is expected to fight and die for his land so that his wife and children can live peaceful life. All this because evolution or God determined that since men can't get pregnant, we need to be strong enough to defend the women who can. Even in more peaceful and feminine cultures, because the male lineage has a history of violence, our evolutionary psychology has determined that we are the more aggressive sex. As numerous studies would suggest, testosterone, the hormone most prominent in males, is the hormone primarily responsible for aggression. Females with an abnormally high amount of testosterone for their sex are also very aggressive and masculine, but they are in the vast minority. Masculine traits are called so because they are most prominent in the average man. Likewise, for feminine traits in females. And men are indeed more aggressive on average than females, as shown by the fact that men commit the vast majority of violent crimes. As a result, men are more likely to be victims of homicide, and more men than women are in the prison system. While many women look at these statistics and say that masculinity is toxic, note that the most of these crimes result from boys who didn't have good father figures to teach them how to control their aggression. As Warren Farrell, author of The Boy Crisis, will tell you, the psychology of females stems from the fact that they can become pregnant. The fact that they are the ones to spend 9 months with the child growing in their wombs creates a natural connection between mother and child that the father lacks. Mothers then become the more protective and nurturing of the two parents. We find that women's brains produce more oxytocin than men's, making it easier for them to make that strong mother-child bond, and indeed is a factor in women being generally more social than men. Of course, the psychology of males and females are far more similar than they are different. After all, they are both human. Both exhibit qualities of masculinity or femininity to one degree or another. However, it is also should be considered how the differences in biology, which shape their unique experiences, also shape their character. As evolutionary psychologist Professor Anne Campbell put it,
"It seems to me quite extraordinary that you could imagine that evolution has operated on the reproductive systems and has had absolutely no effect at all on our brain, the single most expensive organ that we have in the body."
Should men and women be as masculine or feminine as they want to be? Yes, absolutely, 100%. But consider the gender equality paradox. When you remove all social or economic pressures from a person, that individual will pursue a career they find best suited to their interests, which is why women in such situations tend to aim for traditionally feminine jobs and men towards masculine. So, where does that leave transgender people in general? I find it arrogant for a man to say he knows what it means to be a woman, as if he knows what it is like to have monthly periods and be pregnant for 9 months, or for a woman to say that she knows what it's like to be a man, as if she knows how world-ending it is to be kicked in the balls. John Gardner refers to this concept in his book The Art of Fiction as psychic distance. Originally, the term was used to refer to the distance between the reader and the characters she was reading about. But let's say she is reading about a man's experience with the world. She might understand his plight, yet there is still a strong disconnect. She is reminded that she is just reading words on a page. If she is watching a movie, she is still reminded of herself and the frame around the film. However, she would close the gap even more with a VR headset. An experiment was done where white people experienced less racial bias by putting on a VR headset and looking at virtual black skin. Yet, because we privileged white people never personally experience what it's like to grow up with a single mother in a crappy neighborhood, we will never fully comprehend what life is like for most black people in America. If we were to play a fully immersive VR game that puts us into the body of a bat and flap about, feeling all the sensations of a bat, the psychic distance would still be a thing, as we still have our human brains pumping human hormones. Similarly, if a man gets surgery to look like a woman, we might ask, does he really understand what it is like to be a woman? Has he closed the gap? He still can't get periods or experience giving birth. Even if he has a uterus transplant, I doubt he could handle it. His body simply is not made for one, and would surely reject the organ, and he would surely die when attempting to carry a baby in it. The psychic distance that separates people, beasts of the field, fowls of the air, critters of the earth, fishes of the sea, vegetation, the earth, the space, it all keeps order in the universe. It keeps up from down, love from hate, good from evil, order from chaos, shadow from light, and even male from female. It keeps it expanding. It keeps existence as is. For it must needs be that there is an opposition in all things, if not so. Righteousness cannot be brought to pass, neither wickedness, neither holiness nor misery, neither good nor bad. Wherefore all things must be a compound in one. Wherefore, if it should be one body, it must needs remain as dead, having no life, neither death, nor corruption, nor incorruption, happiness, nor misery, neither sense nor insensibility. Wherefore it must needs have been created for a thing of naught. Wherefore there would have been no purpose in the end of its creation. Wherefore this thing must needs destroy the wisdom of God and his eternal purposes, and also the power and the mercy and the justice of God. Wherefore all things must have vanished away. If a male were to cross over into the realm of the female Follet, his death would surely be inevitable. He would need to die to oblivion, and another would take his place, to be washed clean of ever having been male to begin with. Memories would be lost, dreams destroyed, hopes devoured. And if the male became entirely female, he would surely say, there is no difference between the man and the woman. They are identical, equal, the same. None are sacred, all are sexless. And when all are sexless, there will be equality. There will be no women and no men. There will be but a fraternity, free and equal. The only consoling thought is that it will endure but for one generation. And these preachers of equality know only this, pure vengeance in their hearts, and the abyss consumes them whole. Suddenly there is no meaning in man or woman, nor in being human. They think of themselves as no different from the beasts, and they de-evolve. Human becomes just as undefinable as man or woman to them. They seek to be ageless, sexless, raceless, and humanless in spite of their biology which they were born with. They call good evil and evil good because for them there is no difference. And this will indeed endure but for one generation. For indeed you need both male and female to create more generations. They would then, after the abyss of nihilism, be destroyed. So be homosexual if you wish. Dress in clothes more associated with the opposite sex if you will. Be as masculine or feminine as you want to be. But this is where I draw the line. Man and woman must remain separate, unequal, unsame, forever, each possessing qualities the other needs. With this shall they maintain their sacredness, and they shall progress eternally together forever. A phrase from the Family Proclamation reads, "Gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose." Since those words have been written, the consensus has been that one's gender is such an essential part of an individual that it will remain the way it is forever. Men remaining as men and women remaining as women. As Dallin H. Oakes explained in the General Conference of October 2018,
"Gender is eternal. Before we were born on this earth, we all lived as male and female spirits in the presence of God."
But why must these things be? Many people inside and outside the church hate this doctrine. They would rather the church conform to the rest of the world instead of the other way around. Some believe that the phrase from the Family Proclamation that I mentioned can be interpreted to mean that gender is fluid and eternally changing, as if we are Time Lords from the BBC show Doctor Who, where every time we die, we can regenerate into the opposite sex.
So, look, Time Lords, bit flexible on the whole like man-woman thing then, yeah?
We're the most civilized civilization in the universe. We're billions of years beyond your petty human obsession with gender and its associated stereotypes.
But the father of modern existentialism was Jean-Paul Sartre. He once looked at a waiter and wondered if he was a waiter or just pretending to be one. One could ask the same thing about gender. Is a woman, or is she just pretending to be a woman? Whenever a person comes out as transgender, as a society we often make it a habit of praising the person for being brave and coming out as his or her true self. Still, I ask, how can we possibly know for sure that that person is for sure coming out as his or her authentic self, or as a fake self? For Sartre, to live inauthentically is to live in bad faith. Aristotle's Metaphysics reads, "Being as such may be in several ways. One is to be accidental, another to be true. Non-being is to be false. To live inauthentically is to be false. Non-being. For Sartre, a being is characterized as one who can choose for oneself. One who denies free will say that one was born this way, but that is a lie. That person is living in bad faith and is not a being, but a puppet with memories. To live inauthentically is to live in a way contrary to your nature, as established in the pre-mortal life. And as I explained in my video, The Ever Downward Spiral of Gender Theory, living inauthentically causes tremendous chaos, confusion, and distress. Indeed, when I see a woman, I do not see a performance, but rather a simple way of being. Not so with the transgender person. With them, all I see is performance, often crude overacting, and in some cases, a farce. But to better understand, let us consider the topic of eternal progression from a strictly biological perspective. I can only give a brief summation of what I mean. The most basic living organism, the cell, is sexless, genderless. It only reproduces in cloning itself and splitting off from its parent. If evolution is to be believed, then this is how all life started. Though, indeed, we find that this is how we, too, begin life in our mother's womb. We could call the whole universe one giant womb, as Spencer W. Kimball put it. Man is a god in embryo, and has in him the seeds of godhood, and he can, if he will, rise to great heights. Inherent in all living things is the ability to reproduce and die, rebirth in the offspring, an endless cycle. All things begin simply before they become more complex. As a life form becomes more complicated, it will soon need to develop sex. Why is this? Because life forms which reproduce asexually without sex are only capable of cloning themselves, and clones maintain all of the strengths but also all of the weaknesses of the parent. A single virus could destroy an entire system. It is an unchanging system that cannot progress, existing in a world where change is nature. The propagation of life is all about diversity and originality. The more diverse the parents, the more varied the offspring. By integrating and merging genes, we can evolve and progress into higher stages of life. When one parent possesses a weak gene, it is covered by the other parent's gene. But without diverse enough parentage, such as with incest, the parent's shared weakness is only doubled in the children. and they can be born with terrible deformities. While the homosexual lifestyle can have its benefits, they are often the most loving people in a community, the style lacks eternal progression. The law of adoption can provide them with children, however the children are not biological, and if they are, it is only with one parent and someone else. Children create the kingdom. So what is the homosexual couple to do? Eternally adopt children from other parents, or have children with someone of the opposite sex outside the union eternally? Furthermore, the adoption only creates spiritual immortality, not physical immortality. Those spiritually immortal but not physically immortal, their name is known by others living today, but that person never had any biological children of their own. An example would be Nikola Tesla. Just about everyone knows his name, so his spirit lives on, but his body is dust, having had no children to carry on his blood. And as soon as such a name is spoken for the last time, that individual will cease to exist. So be grateful for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints' initiative to collect as many names as possible, to put them through the temple so those names can live on in spirit. If one day we developed a program in which we can take human skin cells and turn them into gametes so homosexual parents can have a shared biological offspring, I am convinced that such a child, without a proper diverse parent of the opposite sex, would be only comparable to an incest child. Therefore, as humans continue to progress, the man and the woman will continue to be more and more diverse from each other. In some cases, in the animal kingdom, with less complicated species than humans, such as with seahorses and clownfish, the differences between males and females are almost non-existent and confusing. But with humans, there is a definitive difference between the sexes, even if some people wish to ignore the biology of it all. Not just physically, but also psychologically. And those born intersex will soon be a thing of the past. Those who wish to live in a genderless, sexless society would only cause the human race to devolve. As humans grow in complexity and diversity, will a third gender associated with a third gamete come into the picture? Will the act of reproduction one day require 3 instead of just 2? I doubt it. But our continuing diversity might one day call back polygamy or polyandry. I am sure the genders will remain as 2. After all, men and women cannot become so diverse that they may as well be 2 different species. As we know, Mother Nature doesn't allow 2 totally different species to breed and reproduce with each other. There must remain some similarities that remain for the 2 to stay compatible. When we couple these earthly things with heavenly things, we begin to see why the law of God is that only a man and woman sealed for time and all eternity can progress, for even Father God is subjected to Mother Nature. The heavens are bound by the earth. We see why the first commandment in the Garden of Eden was to multiply. The angels that do not follow this law stand separate only as sentinels, to minister for those who are worthy of a far more and exceeding and eternal weight of glory. The conclusion of the progression of the man and woman married eternally together will be as such, to become a god and his goddess over countless generations, creating and maintaining universes without end. For herein is the work of my Father continued, that he may be glorified. To my YouTube channel, please hit that subscribe button and click that bell icon. Thank you for watching, and remember to keep it righteous. Ever since one of my best friends showed it to me, I have been so enraptured by it. 2001: A Space Odyssey. I didn't understand how I could watch a space pod slowly descend on a platform and yet be so radically fixated on the screen. Stanley Kubrick truly is a master of hypnotizing his audience. But then the weed-fueled ending happened, and all I could think was, what the hell did I just watch? It is indeed the most intriguing sci-fi film ever conceived. I didn't realize the deep symbolic themes then, but recently when I sat down to watch it again with another friend, as the credits rolled I nearly fell out of my seat when the words "Thus spoke Zarathustra" appeared on the screen as the title for the movie's central theme. The song was composed by German composer Richard Strauss in 1896, inspired by the book of the same name by Friedrich Nietzsche, and Kubrick, with his co-writer Arthur C. Clarke, was equally motivated to make his movie. It is here that I realized that I had always been an existentialist, even before I studied the topic. But first, let's go back to the beginning. From the dawn of civilization, we believed that we were the center of the universe. It was thought that man was created in the image of God. Humans stood apart from the beast as the glory of God. The stars, sun, and moon were shown to him and rotated around him. But the arrogance was soon overturned when science began answering questions previously only lauded to religion. It was found that man was not the center of the universe. Copernicus displaced the earth from the center and replaced it with the sun. Galileo looked through a telescope to observe many galaxies far beyond the heavens and discovered that we are not the only ones, for we only exist on a speck of dust in the vast expanse of the cosmos. But then everything changed forever when Darwin published his theory on how humans are no different from the common animal and evolved by natural selection, independent from any higher power. Recent advancements seem to confirm Darwin's theory, as we find that humans share much of their DNA with chimpanzees. In 1882, this led Nietzsche to cry, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." If you've seen my previous videos, The Latter-day Saint Who Cried God is Dead and Death Note, A World Without Justice, you should know the philosophical implications of Nietzsche's declaration, how the death of God would cause humanity to turn towards nihilism and despair. Unlike most atheists, Nietzsche knew and feared the worst. Since man had been so heavily tied to God since his dawning, suddenly eliminating God from the equation would leave morality without a base. Without God, morality consists of procreating and doing whatever it takes to keep yourself and your posterity alive. There is no stopping me from killing another person to ensure that. Indeed, it was Dostoevsky who explored this type of morality in his book Crime and Punishment. In the book, the main character reasons with himself to kill a rich, greedy, abusive woman who is near the end of her life so that he can use her money for better things. Here we get the famous quote, "If there is no God, everything is permitted." Without God, humans are reduced to their basic animalistic instincts, like the shark which devours its own young. Mother Nature, without Father God, paints a bleak, chaotic world in which only the strong survive and prey on the weak. And indeed, this is what we observe with the apes at the beginning of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So being an atheist, what was Nietzsche's solution to the death of God? Many people don't want to acknowledge it, but at some point, we must look down at our hands and realize that they are stained with the blood of God, and that we have replaced him with false gods. Gods which lack body, parts, or passions. Gods which cannot see, hear, taste, smell, or reason. Such as the god of pornography, the god of alcohol, the god of tobacco, the god of drugs, the god of celebrity culture, the god of social media, the god of streaming services, the god of video games, the god of fast food, the god of comfort, and so forth. Some atheists want to leave the center as a void without any god, but mankind cannot help but worship and replace God. Others attempt to worship God, but only worship his rotting corpse instead. We have become addicted to these false gods. We have become enslaved. We do what we can to filter out the reality that our lives are genuinely meaningless, doing what we can to avoid suicidal thoughts. And in our self-pity, we attempt to rationalize our current state with what Nietzsche calls slave morality. These he would call the last man. Indeed, the last man should be the last of his kind, or he will be the last of all mankind. He might ask deep philosophical questions, but does not want the answers. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? So asks the last man, and he blinks. He knows that life is full of pain, but instead of confronting it head-on and living it fully, he would lock himself in a padded bomb shelter filled with cotton candy and stuffed teddy bears. He would wish to forget his problems altogether. They are that which is described in the Book of Mormon as saying, "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." These are they which occupy the great and spacious building from Lehi's dream. They will mock and laugh and point the finger of scorn, blind to the fact that their building has no solid foundation. In the book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the wise old man Zarathustra is turned away from a crowd after being mocked and laughed and pointed at with their finger of scorn. He had come to preach the Ubermensch to them, but the public met his teachings with ridicule. Instead, they wanted the last man. In The Gay Science, the same book in which Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, he gave us his solution to the problem, hidden in plain sight. Must we ourselves not become God simply to appear worthy of it? This is what the Ubermensch is. Translated into English, it means overman or superman. It is mankind evolving into gods, to become our own masters, independent from God. For indeed, if Nietzsche was a theist, he might say we ought still to live as though there were no God. But yes, indeed, we must become our own gods, our own masters, apart from the one true God. As Nietzsche wrote, one repays a teacher badly if one always remains nothing but a pupil. As the most prominent religion to preach this concept of theosis, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has always been viewed as quite strange to the general public. Indeed, many inside the church still find the doctrine hard to grasp that they are certainly children of a higher power destined to inherit this power one day. But it is something we should be content with. As Joseph Smith taught, if men do not comprehend the character of God, they do not comprehend themselves. When I put out a video in which I asked questions for atheists, I was surprised to find that despite the many people who did post answers to the questions, none wanted to consider the two questions which dealt with a possible God. Indeed, God could not exist unless there was the possibility of a potential God. And if a possible God can exist, then there is the possibility of God himself existing. The transhumanist community of the Latter-day Saints is a curious one, especially since there are ones who even are atheists. They might not believe Joseph Smith saw God, but they believe in the principles and teachings of the church. But more importantly, though, they may say that God does not exist now, but he can live in the future. They believe in the possible God. Let us turn to the most famous atheists of our generation, Richard Dawkins, to see how he thinks a possible God could come about.
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Compare that to what Joseph Smith taught in the famous King Follet discourse. God himself was once as we are now, and is an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens. That is the great secret. If the veil were rent today, and the great God who holds this world in its orbit, and who upholds all worlds and all things by his power, was to make himself visible, I say, if you were to see him today, you would see him like a man in form, like yourselves in all the person, image, and very form as a man. For Adam was created in the very fashion, image, and likeness of God, and received instruction from, and walked, talked, and conversed with him, as one man talks and communes with another. I care not for how legitimate Charles Darwin's claim that we evolved from apes is, for all I care about is the future of our species. Let it be valid if it is, even if we one day discover that missing link to connect the dots. But Nietzsche himself seemed very fond of the claim. Let us now turn back to 2001: A Space Odyssey. The film begins with the dawn of man, back when we were without God as apes, animalistic and primal. The world they occupied had danger all around every corner. A rival tribe comes and kicks them off of their waterhole. Then, while wandering the wilderness, they come across a mysterious monolith, so enraptured by it that they begin to worship it. One picks up a bone and starts playing with it, and discovers the first tool. He uses it to reclaim his tribe's lost waterhole. He throws the bone in the air, and in its descent, it becomes a spaceship in the match cut. The monolith appears to be a piece of alien technology far beyond our understanding, which has the power to advance the evolution whoever comes in contact with it. The next time humans come into contact with the object, they uncover it on the moon. Instead of being in awe and admiration of the monolith the way the apes were, they decide to take a group photo with it as if they had just caught and conquered it like a fish. But the monolith rejected them. This suggests that the more intelligent intelligent humans become, the harder it is to be mystified. But we should never lose our childlike sense of wonder, no matter how brilliant we become, or we too may be rejected from evolving further. Nietzsche teaches us that man is something to overcome. You must learn to overcome yourself to become Ubermensch, or if you are a woman, an Uberfrau. He writes, "Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Ubermensch, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous on the way, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. We are constantly struggling between the worm and the God inside us, truly a rope between the most excellent version of ourselves and the most feral, between realizing being children of God or succumbing to what the Book of Mormon calls the natural man, for the natural man is an enemy to God." A curious thing is that we share over 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, yet we are vastly superior in our intelligence. As Nietzsche wrote, "What is the ape to man? A laughingstock, a thing of shame, and just the same shall man be to the Ubermensch, a laughingstock, a thing of shame." And yet, only a 1 or 2% difference in DNA is responsible for human superiority in intelligence compared to the ape. Neil deGrasse Tyson once contemplated, what would an extra 1 or 2% do to us? What if we had an extra pair of chromosomes, giving us 46 plus 2?
Maybe everything that we are that is not the chimp is not as smart compared to the chimp as we tell ourselves it is. Maybe the difference between constructing and launching a Hubble telescope and a chimp combining 2 finger motions as sign language, maybe that difference is not all that great. We tell ourselves it is, just the same way we label our books optical illusions. We tell ourselves it's a lot. Maybe it's almost nothing. How would we decide that? Imagine another life form that's 1% different from us in the direction that we are different from the chimp. Think about that. We got 1% difference and we're building the Hubble telescope. Go another 1%. What are we to they? We would be drooling, blithering idiots in their presence. That's what we would be. They would take Stephen Hawking and roll him in front of their primate researchers and say, well, this one is like the most brilliant among them because he can do sort of astrophysics in his head. Oh, isn't that cute? Little Johnny can do that too. Oh, that's so nice. Oh, in fact, Johnny just did that. Let me get it. It's on the refrigerator door. Here he is. He did it in his elementary school class.
This could be the only difference between us and God, that 1%. This could be the being who exists outside of space and time above the 6th or 7th dimensions. Any being like that would be God compared to us. But the question is, can man ascend to that level? According to physicist Michio Kaku, man may not be too far off from deification.
You know, if you were to meet your great-grandparents of the year 1900, they were dirt farmers back then. They didn't live much beyond the age of 40 on average. Long-distance communication in the year 1900 was yelling at your neighbor. And yet, if they could see you now with iPads and iPods and satellites and GPS and laser beams, how would they view you? They would view you as a wizard or sorcerer. However, if we can now meet our grandkids of the year 2100, how would we view them? We would view them as gods. Like in Greek mythology, Zeus could control objects around him by pure thought, materialize objects just by thinking. And their perks being a Greek god, Venus had a perfect body, a timeless body, and we are beginning now to unravel the genetics at the molecular level of the aging process. And then Apollo, he had a chariot that he could ride across the heavens. We will finally have that flying car that we've always wanted to have in our garage. By the year 2100, we will have the power of the gods. To paraphrase Arthur C. Clarke, Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from divinity.
Let us now compile everything we have discussed thus far into the final act of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The last act sees a crew of astronauts on their way to Jupiter with their companion AI HAL 9000, the most advanced artificial intelligence ever created. One, we are told, has never made an error. The crew doesn't seem to fully understand why they were sent on a mission to Jupiter. They simply exist in the vast, cold, dark void of space, hardly working until something goes wrong. They will play chess, eat baby food, watch TV, sunbathe, watch birthday telegrams, run in a circle, etc., living very mundane, unconscious lives. Their lives are meaningless, relying wholly on HAL 9000 for operating the ship to Jupiter and keeping them alive. The circle which the man runs around calls to mind Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, a curse in which an individual is cursed to run in a loop forever with nothing new in it, where every day is the same, never changing. A curse many in a modern capitalistic world feel all too well. A world where God is dead and nihilism is inevitable. Hal soon comes to believe that the lazy humans are more a hindrance than anything else, and the two humans outside their sleeping pods begin to doubt whether or not Hal is genuinely incapable of error. Hal plots to kill the humans by creating a false problem. It then deactivates the sleeping pods of the other humans and kills them also. When David Bowman is the only one left, he cannot re-enter the spaceship. In a desperate and dangerous attempt to re-enter, David shoots himself into an open airlock without his helmet, so he can climb inside and deactivate Hal. As David deactivates Hal, Hal begins to fake emotions of fear in an attempt to prevent David from turning him entirely off. No matter how hard it might be, if a man is to ascend to a higher plane of existence, he must rise above the technology he has become so reliant on, even that he had become like a small child. Or consider even also WALL-E, where the humans' reliance on technology has turned them into oversized infants who cannot move on their own. But indeed, we must rise above all that makes us last men and become Ubermensch. Man must rise above nihilism, creating meaning for himself through hard work and art, and walk a path that none but he can walk, one who doesn't allow anything to stand in his way. It is here that David enters the monolith, floating in space, and he has an exalting experience. He joins a room where the higher intelligence can observe him. He watches himself age, a paradigm all older people are all too familiar with. His wine glass shatters as his body decays, but then the monolith appears to him one final time as he lays dying in bed. He reaches out to it, like Adam reaching out to God in Michelangelo's creation of Adam. It is here that he overcomes himself and becomes the Star Child. He returns to Earth with the gospel of the Ubermensch, similar to a resurrected Christ, or as in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, when Nietzsche's Zarathustra came down from the mountains to preach to the masses below a message that would replace the real-world Zarathustra's teaching of the first monotheistic religion, where only God can be God. But indeed, the new message is that man should rise above and become a god like his father, for indeed there can be unlimited gods. How is the Ubermensch achieved? Like the Star Child, we must be like little children and put off the natural man. For the natural man is an enemy to God and has been from the fall of Adam and will be forever and ever unless he yields to the enticings of the Holy Spirit and putteth off the natural man and becometh a saint through the atonement of Christ the Lord, and becometh as a child, submissive, meek, humble, patient, full of love, willing to submit to all things which the Lord seeth fit to inflict upon him, even as a child doth submit to his father. Or consider Nietzsche's three metamorphoses. When under the stewardship of a master, a student should begin as a camel, willing to bear all things and learn without question or complaint. He then should become a lion who wields the sacred no, questioning everything the master gives him. But he should be careful not to take up a new master and revert to a camel, which happens to many people. Few reach the final stage of the child, one willing to bear and grin at his his own challenges and hardships, eternally curious, honest, and creative, in forging a path no one else has traveled. None but he could travel. Only then shall all of humanity spread upward and outward forever in an eternal progression. The child is innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a game, a self-rolling wheel, a first movement, a sacred yes. For the game of creation, my brothers, a sacred yes is needed. The spirit now wills his own will. The world's outcast now conquers his own world. Thank you for watching. If you want to support my channel's growth, please feel free to like the video and subscribe. Tell me about it in the comment section, what I got wrong, and remember to keep it righteous. There is a degree and dimension to theism that all must accept or be destroyed. To the God above that you pray to, where is he? This invisible being which you claim to worship. Do the beasts and fowls worship the same? Do they know him? Doth the earth know him? The most compelling argument for atheism is one that I have been wrestling with for some time now. For one who believes in an intelligent and self-aware being capable of creating and manipulating matter with a mere thought, a being that you have never before heard or seen in your short mortal life, what prevents you from also believing in fairies, unicorns, or Santa Claus? Indeed, what constitutes reality? What is the fabric of your existence? Or is existence an insignificant thing that holds no value? Your eyes deceive you, you are blind, and nihilism must be your fate. Many theists fall victim to this as pastors preach that we should not rely on our eyes or basic instincts, but be totally reliant on God and His Word. Be slaves to God forever. You should not think for yourself, live for yourself, or feel for yourself. Total unquestioning obedience is the law for those who follow God according to these pastors, and those who follow this mindset will die by it. Their freedom is non-existent, all because a book full of writings almost 2,000 years old says so. Why? QAnon, Flat Earth, Satan in the Oval Office, leftists are pure evil, or vaccines cause autism. They start believing in fairy tales, conspiracy theories, lies, unwilling to produce proof of their claims, or directly lacking any semblance of evidence. Latter-day Saints are not exempt from this, as many follow suit. Despite every historical document saying otherwise, a documentary was produced called Who Killed Joseph Smith, in which the director claims that it was not the mob, but John Taylor and Willard Richards as associates of the mob who killed the Smith brothers. However, who is to say that it was not the mob that killed the Smiths in the same manner the film depicts John and Willard? All of this is because the director thought something else was happening in those short, measly 3 minutes, instead of also contemplating everything else surrounding those measly minutes. Now there are many more conspiracy theories that many have taken up concerning the church. So again, we ask, what are we to do with people who are so willing to believe anything due to their blind faith in God? So into their faith are they that all they listen to is conference talks, or all they read is from Deseret Book. They are blind. Their faith is blind. Where has their grasp of reality left them? What is the purpose of God if those who believe in Him too often turn to conspiracy theories and fairy tales? Though atheism is not free of nihilistic tendencies either, it simply manifests differently. Whereas most theists are blind to their nihilistic beliefs, atheists know that they believe in nothing. Atheistic nihilism is often more tangible and whole. They know they can trust their primal instincts. They know that beings who came from nothing shall henceforth return to nothing, and everything they ever do, everything they say, will vanish instantly. We will all be in vain no matter what incredible feats we accomplish. Life has no reason, purpose, or meaning. It simply is. There is no morality, only survival of the fittest, and anything you do to continue your bloodline is considered good, even if it means the death of another lineage. Theists opt for nothing to be everything. Atheists opt for everything to be nothing. Either way, you will have nothing, nil. Therefore, where there is something, it must always remain something. something, and where there is nothing, there must forever remain nothing. What is and isn't remains separate forever. Herein do I give you my Metaphorical God Hypothesis. From what has been observed about the universe, it will all end one day. By heat or crunch, the death of everything is inevitable. To claim a metaphorical God is to say that we can cheat death and escape the end of all things. A rushing belief that future humans have what it takes to transcend their natural state to a higher plane of existence. According to physicists like Neil deGrasse Tyson, the multidimensional theory is a very real possibility. While we cannot observe or access these higher dimensions, we are beginning to understand them at a mathematical level. First, take a piece of paper and draw a point on it. You have just entered the 0th dimension. Now draw a second dot and a line between the two dots. Now you are in the 1st dimension, which consists of length. Now draw a third dot and connect your first two dots to it. Now you are in the 2nd dimension, which consists of length and width. The world you and I live in is the 3rd dimension because it has both length, width, and height. We can move freely in this space. A 2-dimensional being would be flat, only capable of moving forwards, backwards, left, and right, but not up or down. If a 3-dimensional being were to cross over into the 2-dimensional plane, the 2-dimensional beings would only be able to see the line of it, the 2D version of it. The 3D being would grow in and out of seeming nothing and contract as per the 2D being's visuals. Similarly, if a 4D being were to pass through our field of view, it would appear as a 3-dimensional object, and yet it appears out of nowhere. Now suppose that a 3-dimensional cube is a point in space-time. We have entered the 4th dimension if we draw a new line to another cube to create a tesseract. The line we drew is the timeline, where we can move forwards and backwards in time. You can now move to a different time in your life and make a new choice to rewrite your history, like returning to an old save on a video game, only you cannot continue your previous timeline. Now to get to the 5th dimension, we add a second line that extends outward to create a parallel universe in which you can exist simultaneously with an alternate choice you made, yet you cannot meet yourself, but you can in the 6th dimension. It is estimated that dimensions go up to 11. Further dimensions might include alternate universes, in which it was not the Big Bang that started the universe, but something else. Alternate universes where apes conquered humans, and others in which humans never existed. Further up, we might have universes in which the laws of physics behave differently from our own, allowing people like Superman to exist, a being who can fly without wings or a machine, or lift impossibly heavy objects without needing bigger or denser muscles. According to Neil deGrasse Tyson, one possible solution for why in quantum mechanics we see particles popping in and out of existence or becoming entangled with each other across the universe is they are going in and out of higher dimensions that we cannot explain. This would also explain why a being like an angel Moroni can pop in and out of young Joseph's bedroom without waking up his siblings. Moses says he was caught up to a high mountain without moving, but how did he get there so fast? We could be living in higher dimensions yet cannot fully comprehend them yet. It seems interesting to me that we humans can only see and hear a 3-dimensional world, yet we can comprehend higher dimensions than our own. Movies depict people traveling backwards and forwards in time like a 4D being. We write stories of alternate Earths with alternate histories, like we are peering into the 5th and 6th dimensions. We create fantastical worlds which depict alternate laws of physics from our own, like looking into the 8th or higher dimensions. Indeed, with the multi-dimensional theory, who is to say that The Dark Knight isn't based on a true story? Maybe it is. It is nice to imagine there might be a hungry lion around the corner so we can prepare ourselves. But what benefit is there in imagining a dragon is around the corner? What benefit is there in imagining whole new worlds which break the laws of physics, like Pandora and its floating mountains from James Cameron's Avatar? If evolution only programmed us with the specificities of survival, why would we need to have such crazy and wild imaginations? Why can we picture in our minds and create computer-generated worlds so vastly different from our own? Shouldn't we as 3D beings only be capable of imagining the 3rd dimension instead of any higher ones? My hypothesis hypothesis, the metaphorical God, is that we are higher dimensional beings trapped in a three-dimensional world, and our objective is to use our wild imaginations to help us escape before the heat death of the universe. Can we take upon us this tremendous responsibility, awaken the sleeping God inside us, and transcend our three-dimensional plane? Can we take all of humanity's memories with us into this great future? Science seems to support this idea. Consider the brain and its neurons, how it makes one connection as one dimension, and then another for the second dimension, and then a third. The more connections it makes, the higher dimensions it transcends. For the Buddhists, the way we transcend our minds or souls into higher dimensions is a step-by-step process. Through constant meditations, you must learn to let go of all things mentally, which weigh you down. All your desires, the trauma, and all heavy burdens. Make your head as light as a balloon, so it might float forever. Forgive others and yourself. Become immune to pain, pride, arrogance, boasting, lust, greed, and envy. Drop all things which bind you to the third dimension, and care only for things that an eighth dimensional being or higher would care for. Such a being does not care for money, or what he has or has not. He does not worry about the future, or concern himself with the past. For all things are before him, and he simply exists. As soon as you can do that, the whole world becomes yours, one which you freely share with your neighbor. If need be like a shaman. Isolate yourself in the woods away from all technology and people for an hour or more, so that you can entirely drown out the false opinions and humming noise of the world. Clear your mind and return as soon as you are so light that you feel like you can fly.
A shaman is a man, in other words, who has undergone solitariness. He's gone away into the forest to find out who he really is, because it's very difficult to find that out while you're with other people. And the reason is that other people are busy all the time telling you who you are, in many, many ways, by the laws they impose on you, by the behavior ruts they set on you, by the things they tell you, by the fact that they always call you by your name, and by the fact that when you live among people you have to be in a state of ceaseless chatter. But if you want to find out who you are before your father and mother conceived you, who you really are, you almost have to go off by yourself. Go into the forest and stop talking, even stop thinking words, and be absolutely alone. And listen to the great silences. And then, if you're lucky, you recover from the illusion that you're just little me, the so-and-so, and you attain the state of nirvana, which means the blown-out state, the relieved state, the sigh of relief.
And those future humans who have transcended time and space to higher dimensions might be looking down on you right now. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and share it with another human. If there is anything that you find difficult to understand, or that you disagree with, then tell me about it in the comments. And remember to keep it righteous.